Teachers, when did you realize a parent might be dumber than their kid? I had a parent tell me he cut his daughter's hair in a short bob because they noticed her attitude gets bad when her hair gets too long. Then I had another parent tell me his kid was acting dumb for my benefit and that he's really smart at home. They still refused to get him any tutoring. When talking to a parent regarding behavioral issues, the parent said, "Listen, from 8 till 2, he's your problem, not mine." Taught in an old, impoverished town, father told me he wouldn't allow his son to read poetry because it would, quote, make him gay. "Every single adult should know where every single child is on campus at all times," the mum said, yelling at me. I'd been giving her son extra help after school along with some other students. We were 6 weeks in and the mum hadn't come to back to school night or made any attempt to speak to or contact me. She came to pick up her son and had no idea where to go because she hadn't been to our school before or read the after-school group flyer. Instead, she yelled at some other teachers who were waiting out in front of the school with some of their own after-school students to be picked up. They had no idea who she or her child was. She couldn't ask them where my class was because she didn't know the name of her child's teacher. I walked up with her son as this was happening. She turned and continued to chew me out. She said a lot of ridiculous things that day. It was a complete and blatant projection of irresponsibility. At the end of each year, all the students' merits are tallied up and the top 3 students get a prize. One of the parents was complaining about how it's unfair their child started so low every year, it was a lot harder for them to get to the top. The list starts alphabetized. I was told last year that the obvious reason I work in special education is because I, quote, can't get a job teaching normal children. That's quite enough humanity for me for one day. Oh, god damn it, I still have another 18 minutes to record. Frickin' crap. Don't be like this adult, they're really stupid. Case closed, on to the next one. I taught 4th grade next to a military base, so my class was in pencil. Midway through the year, I got a Dutch girl. She didn't speak a word of English. Her dad dropped her off in my room after signing her up, then told me not to make any exceptions for her. She'd learn English on her own. However, she was to be exempt from math because she's never had a math class before. The man was an engineer with the army. I taught her math. She appeared to have very limited exposure to it. By the last semester, though, she was on honor roll, including math. "You know, intellectual property is a real gray area," said a parent in regard to their offspring's blatant plagiarism. I remember my teacher caught a kid in our class who plagiarized an entire essay. As he was reading it, the teacher cut in and started reading something off the computer that was almost word for word what the kid wrote. Every single thing he handed in after that, the teacher checked. I remember him claiming to write a song for this one girl he liked. I didn't know it at the time, but it turned out to be a Beatles song. I was in an IEP meeting. When the counselor asked the student what his post-high school plans were, he proudly stated that he was interested in studying animal science. His mother angrily swung her head at him and said, "Animal science? Oh hell no. What about our plans for the NFL?" The student got embarrassed and said, "Well, I need a backup plan, Mom." And she said, "Not when you're as great a player as you are." The student was mediocre at best at football. Not as bad as some, but when I was student teaching, a parent emailed saying to give his child a C. No reason, just give her a C. She was getting an F, and I couldn't believe the insanity of just saying what boiled down to C, now. Well, yes, my child is misbehaving, throwing chairs, hitting other kids, but you took his paper airplane in 2nd grade and scrunched it up, so this is really your own doing. I think the best thing to do is for you to help him make a new paper airplane and then just apologize. I'm sure he'll behave. The kid was in 6th grade at this point. Spanish class. The parent asked me to exempt her kid from speaking anything in Spanish. Said it made her daughter uncomfortable to say anything in Spanish. I had an Asian kid that was acing everything. Straight A's. I told his mother that I think he's a little bored. She puffed up and said, "I'll go home and speak to him about that at once." I used to be a preschool teacher, and we did evaluations every few months. One 4-year-old girl, sweet as could be, could only count to the number 4. She struggled with other things, but the counting was by far the worst. Her parents came into the evaluation and were delighted that their daughter could count to 4. We had to gently explain to them that she was well behind the other kids. Even the actually challenged kids surpassed her. She was obviously bright, so we asked them what they worked on with her at home. Nothing. They did nothing with her. They assumed that she didn't or wouldn't start learning till their teachers taught her. To their credit, they did start working with her at home, and by the beginning of the next year, she was ready to move up. I've never been so proud and disappointed at the same time in a set of parents. When I was a swim instructor, this parent was complaining about how her son wasn't improving in swim lessons. It was true that sometimes I had trouble motivating him, but I felt he was doing well. Apparently, she also complained that I wasn't the only one teaching his lessons and that I got several substitutes. That's not true, I taught all of the lessons. So in the next lesson, I thought the kid was doing well again and improving. I even got him to swim short distances without assistance. He was 5 years old and he couldn't touch the bottom, by the way. The mother didn't seem to agree with his progress. She said something like, "He can't just keep going back and forth and kicking the whole time. I mean, you do realize that's how people swim, right, lady?" They sadly didn't come back. My aunt's a teacher, and I remember her telling me about one strange parent encounter about a year ago. She taught the 6th or 7th grade. There was this one kid in her class who was severely underperforming, and even after numerous confrontations with him, he never worked in class or got his grades back up. My aunt had to call his mother down to the school and sit down and just try to talk to her about it. She mentioned that she felt he had the capacity to perform much better, but he just didn't. And the mother just denied it. To be clear, she wasn't crazy or anything, just in absolute denial. My aunt showed his grades, but she ripped the paper apart and told her that it's not true. She said, "I don't know what you're talking about, my son is perfect," and stormed out of the school. Parents like this are the reason why my son's teachers are always so fricking surprised when my wife and I tell them we'll gladly come to the school to punish and reprimand our son if he's acting up. We had a teacher once tell us she was almost stabbed for telling a girl to stop talking in class. The girl's father took this as an attack on his little princess who could do no wrong and showed up at the school with a knife. At parents' evening, "Oh, don't worry about my daughter, she's thick. She only needs to cook and clean. Now how's my little lad doing?" Multiple times over the school year, she emailed me with something like, "My child has been coming home saying she has no homework in your class. I believe she should be having homework from your class every day. Can you please give her some homework?" Okay. 1, there was actually homework. 2, the kid wasn't turning in any homework that quarter. And 3, the zeros were all reflected in the online grade report, which the parent apparently refused to read. Okay, I've reread it and it says she did this multiple times, so she kept forgetting these points? And then continually believed the kid when he said he didn't have any homework for his multiple classes? I mean, that's a problem, for both parties. Parents' evening last year, year 10 or so 14 or 15-year-old kids. I told a woman that her son was doing really well in English and was very bright. She actually scoffed and said, "Really?" The boy was sat there too. I asked what he was thinking of doing when he left school, and he said he wanted to go to college to do A-levels. Kids at this school had ridiculously low aspirations, so this was music to my ears. Then his mother interjected and said, No, you're doing an apprenticeship. You're going to be a plasterer like your dad." Now, I have no problem with kids taking the vocational path as opposed to the academic one, but this kid had a shot, and he wanted to take that shot, but his own mum made him feel that there was no point. So sad. I was a 22-year-old female Asian middle school teacher in a district that was 99% black. You couldn't find any other person who looked quite like me in a 20-mile radius. Had a parent tell me that I couldn't possibly be a good influence on her child. After all, I do skanky things like nails and hair during my off hours. I guess the community's impression of Asian women was that we all worked at nail salons. The extremely skewed Asian stereotypes, however, worked in my favor for classroom management when my kids were convinced that I knew martial arts. Anytime I put on my teacher face when the students were misbehaving, one of the kids would exclaim, "Oh crap, Miss Sung is about to kung fu your butt." I never had too many problems with the kids that year. "It's not your job to teach my son lessons." I kid you not, that's a verbatim quote. My mother is a retired English college teacher. Helicopter parents would regularly call to inquire about their kids' studies. She'd say, "That's confidential as per college policy. If you want to learn your child's grade, you're going to have to ask him or her." But I'm paying his or her tuition. It doesn't matter. Your child has a right to privacy. I can only discuss your child's grade with them. I'm calling the dean. By all means. Rinse and repeat over and over and over. This parent of a child with behavioral problems sends him to school with crap for breakfast every day. Fast food, Starbucks, cupcakes, you name it. We spent a lot of time trying to get her to even feed the kid breakfast in the first place because he refused to eat what was provided at school, and was an absolute nightmare on an empty stomach. We're talking hide under the desk screaming all day levels of difficulty. So we didn't say anything for a while because at least he was on time and eating. Except then all the other students, who previously had no problem with the milk, cereal, and fruit they got at school, started noticing the smug kid eating his delicious pancakes or whatever he had that particular day. It became a full-blown kindergarten hunger strike, and it was miserable for us. When we asked the mother to please make an effort to feed him prior to arriving at school, she said she didn't have time unless we wanted him to be late every day. That was another problem that took forever to resolve. We reiterated that the school provided a perfectly healthy breakfast for free, and maybe she could make an effort to convince him to eat what everyone else got. He'd do literally whatever she asked. It was just a matter of staying for 10 minutes to eat with him, and she said, "I don't want him eating that sugary, processed crap." So he took his McDonald's with an aide in the classroom for the rest of the year. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Kindergarten teacher here. Top questions and statements include, why isn't my child writing their name yet? I don't want my child wearing sunscreen. We live in far north Queensland, Australia. I took my child to the GP. He doesn't need a specialist. My child is free range. I will not vaccinate. My wife is an elementary school teacher and suspected that one of her students might be autistic. The kid wouldn't communicate well at all and had issues with using the bathroom, showed other classic signs of being on the spectrum. My wife had a conference with the mother and explained that she'd like him to be evaluated, but the mother refused and said that if her son did have autism, my wife was the one who caused it. I'm not a teacher, but I coach my kids' youth sports teams. I once had a dad approach me and bribe me $50 to prevent a certain kid from playing in our upcoming flag football game. These were 6-year-old kids. The kid did make a costly mistake in the previous game, but the fact that this random dad was willing to pay me to bench the kid was mind-blowing. I should make it clear that I didn't accept the money. The dad attempted to bribe me and I turned it down for obvious reasons. My mum is frequently forced to let kids retake tests because they didn't do well on them. Not because the kids have any sort of problem, but because the parents whine and complain that their genius somehow got a failing grade on a test, so the school just gives in and lets the kids redo it. Third graders' parents come in with a notarized list of demands. Children in my class must be prohibited from bringing in gluten ever. They said they didn't want her to be left out because other kids were eating gluten. No, she didn't have celiac, it was just the family's personal choice. Then, that I let their daughter choose who she sits next to each day. The class had a carefully coordinated seating plan, by the way. Also, that she be exempt from history class because she was too advanced for our history class but not advanced enough for an AP class. Long story short, they switched her to a private school before year's end. Country, rodeo, this lady was calling her kids over. I was a high school varsity coach. I had a nice girl on my team with very little talent. After not starting, her mum came up to me and said, "It's really sad that Jenny isn't playing. How can you hold it against her?" I asked her what she was talking about, and her response, "Well, her dad's brother dated you in middle school and he broke up with you." Funny thing is, I have no clue who she was talking about. Oh boy, yeah, that's just so perplexing a thing to be blindsided by. If any given failed Tinder date's friends came up and just announced something about one of these people that hadn't worked out, it would be 10 seconds of stupid face from me. No, I don't know their last names and multitude of relatives, so please go away. My daughter's senior class voted a medically handicapped girl prom queen. I feared they were playing a joke on her, but my daughter insisted they all truly wanted her to win. Her family was poor, and the teachers chipped in and bought her a dress and shoes, stuff like that. The summer after graduation, I ran into the mother of another student in the class. This mother had pushed her daughter to be popular, bought her the best of everything, pushed her into being a cheerleader, and even went to the point of trying to set her up with boys in class. She actually chased them on her daughter's behalf. She's also a bit nuts, so I try my best to avoid her if I see her first. This day, I wasn't so lucky. Immediately, she started complaining about the student that was voted prom queen. She kept saying how her daughter should have been prom queen, the other students just voted for the other girl because they didn't want her daughter to get it, which was partially true to be fair. She went on and on about it being so unfair that she was so mad, and then she started on how horrible it was to vote in a girl that was in special ed's class because she really didn't deserve to graduate. She was so poor that the teachers had to buy her dress, as if it were a sin to be poor. I finally got sick and tired of her crap, and I didn't like her anyway, and told her what I thought. I thought it was a very nice thing for the students to do. This may have been the only special moment that this girl will ever have. This witch's daughter will have many special moments. And it was so nice for the teachers to make sure she was dressed as nice as the other girls. I continued on at length, and this woman was stunned, to say the least. She expected me to agree with her, but I was sick of her, and how she was nearly pushing her daughter into any boy who'd date her, and told her daughter's friends about her bedroom life and her crazy tirades every time I saw her. Now, when I run into her, we live in a small town, she doesn't speak and goes on her way. Thank goodness. The family was incredibly well off. The little girl wore Matilda Jane clothing every single day, which is expensive. The individual pieces are between $40 and $60. She almost never wore the same thing twice. Now compare her to a little boy in my class. His dad was in and out of jail. He always wore dirty jeans and the same pair of boots. His mum cut his hair, and you could tell. But he was full of personality. All the kids wanted to play with him. He got a little rowdy and did some lightly inappropriate things like, "That's badass," or "What the hell?" But I would never peg him as a behaviorally challenged kid. Well, the rich mother of Matilda Jane girl approached my lead teacher and flat out demanded that her little girl never have contact with this boy because he was a bad influence. She wasn't to sit by him or speak to him or play with him. When we refused, she gave all of these instructions to her daughter, who would approach the little boy and announce over the whole class, "You have to leave here so I can play." People never cease to tee me off. I wasn't a teacher, but I was volunteering while in college to help a school district run a group field day. Me and another friend of mine were asked to sub in for a class-versus-class game of tug-of-war for first graders. One class had 6 less students. Of course, me and my friend hammed it up and acted like we were really struggling. Afterwards, one of the parents from the team we were on just started shouting at us, telling we should be ashamed for not trying our hardest and for faking. Oh yeah, her behavior and aggression vary with the phases of the moon. They said about their child who publicly threatened to kill me over unplugging her phone charger. I teach piano. I used to be a concert pianist. After I was teaching this 7-year-old girl for 2 weeks, the father pulls me aside after the lesson and asks, "So how long until she's as good as you? 6 months?" Had a star athlete who was being recruited by Ivy League schools failing my English class. On top of his generally poor academic performance, I also caught him cheating on a homework assignment, which he vehemently denied. His mum scheduled a meeting with an administrator and proceeded to berate me and to accuse me of discriminating against student athletes. I was the pep club sponsor at the time. Then she said her son would never cheat. I pulled out his homework and proceeded to read one of his answers. I, as a 16-year-old girl, Mum then begins yelling at him, "You can't even cheat right! What's wrong with you? How are you going to get into college if you can't cheat?" I was a daycare teacher, and this happened during the summer. We had 2 siblings coming in, and in their file it was clearly marked that they were both lactose intolerant. We take every allergy very seriously and do provide snacks to the children, so every box of snacks gets inspected to make sure the kids eating it will be fine. And we also provide alternative snacks just in case. So, this goes on for a week until I notice the kid is drinking milk out of a carton. I go to my supervisor and we ask the kid where she got the milk from. She's so little she doesn't really know, but she thinks she got it from her lunchbox. So now I'm confused. My supervisor is confused as well, and the kid is even more confused since she claims she drinks milk all the time. We get out her form and call the parent, and of course we can't get a hold of her. We agree to monitor the kid until her mum picks her up. She was fine, no tummy ache or anything, so we were carefully optimistic that we'd dodged a bullet there. Well, turns out she isn't lactose intolerant at all. They're not vegan either. Her mum just read somewhere that normal milk makes you smell bad, so she only gives her kids organic milk. It was the end of my shift, so I just left, and laughed my butt off all the way home. Well, at least this is just the funny kind of stupid rather than the permanently stunting my child's chances at life sort of stupid. Just read a little bit more whenever you hear about a newfangled health trend, parents. I was, for several years, a high school teacher here in the UK. At parents' evenings, you'd meet a variety of parents of all faiths and walks of life. For this particular evening, I was sat close to an English teacher friend of mine when the parents of Matt came and sat down. Matt was a pretty singular child. A late transfer, not many friends, horrendous condescending attitude to other students, but also a complainer that no one would work with him, or that no one was good enough when the few that volunteered stepped forwards. So the parents were always likely to be something. Matt's mother sat down and opened with the line, "Once this meeting is done, I'd like to make a formal complaint to your line manager and the head teacher. Usually, this would make most teachers blood freeze, but my colleague had been teaching a while and worked to diffuse the situation. Well, hopefully it won't come to that, but I'm sorry you're upset. What seems to be the problem? I refuse to have my son be made to read occult texts that encourage devil worship in class. Matt's mother was referring to the Year 7 syllabus text, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which she promptly slammed down as evidence on the table. I see, said my colleague, and proceeded to explain that the national curriculum had done an amount of pre-approval on this, and along with 99% of the country had no problem with it. Matt's mother had come prepared, however. I don't care. He's not reading it. I demand that he be given something of more literary worth. I've checked the national curriculum guidelines, and Matthew will from now on be studying something respectable. I'd like you to separately teach him Macbeth, which is also on the approved reading list. What followed was, I think, only 2 minutes, but it felt like 10 as my colleague slowly and methodically listed all of the occult references in Macbeth, starting with the witches, then ghosts, and then throwing in the numerous murders, I think just for the F of it, to Matthew's mother. To her credit, she sat silently until he was done, at which point she mumbled something about still not wanting Harry Potter and left. I've never seen such a calm takedown of someone's bullcrap opinion before or since.
What's the saddest thing to hear "it's okay, I'm used to it" as a response to? Had a friend who was really lonely and his old friends were awful to him. Like, there was this one girl who would just hit him and stuff and emotionally abuse him really bad. But he didn't have any other friends, so he just stuck with it. Accidentally hit him lightly or something when he said, "It's okay, I'm used to it." And I felt so bad for the poor guy. He's fine now though. My son talking about how his mother, my ex-wife, talks to him. During our marriage, she would take everything out on me, whether it was my fault or not. Too busy at work? Shout at me. Her family's coming to visit? Shout at me. Now we're apart, and she does the same thing to him. He moves between both houses by his own choice. Last week, she told him, "You might as well leave." As you would imagine, he was very upset. When he got to my place, he was making excuses for her and actually said, "It's okay, I'm used to it." I've never spoken badly about his mother to any of my children until now. I've been talking to him since then that she used to do this to me and that it's actually not okay. He spent a lot of time considering what I've been saying. He's 20 and has said that he's going to have a discussion with her about it. I hope she acts like as much of an adult as he is, but I don't like the chances of that. The one time a girl ever asked me out in my life, back in high school, I told her, "Sorry, I just met a girl I really like and we're starting to get serious, so I can't right now." And her answer to that was, "It's okay, I'm used to it. No one ever picks me first." Or something like that. I felt absolutely terrible, because usually back then, that would have been my line. Preface, my boyfriend has lost his mom, both of his uncles, and his step-grandfather, all separate instances. Literally last Sunday night at midnight, my boyfriend woke me up to tell me that one of his really good friends from high school died. He was so upset and I was so sad for him. I told him how sorry I was for him because I honestly didn't even know what to say. His response? "It's okay, I'm used to it." In the saddest tone I've ever heard. I started crying. How freaking heartbreaking. When you're volunteering at the homeless shelter and they have to turn someone out on a cold winter night because the facility is maxed out, the person with tears says, "It's okay, I'm used to it." Oh, guys, this is going to be a rough one to get through. I had a roommate after college that unfortunately slipped back into a pill problem. I came back to the apartment one evening with my mom to find my roommate passed out on the floor and incoherent. I was freaking out the entire time, but my mom was incredibly calm and knew exactly what to do. Afterwards, she told me, "I used to have to do that all the time with my dad." My mom grew up with an alcoholic father who ended up dying of his disease, so she had been through a lot. But I really had no idea how bad it had been for her until then. I still get a little choked up thinking about her face in that moment. This won't be a very popular opinion unless you've really been through it, but when people constantly interrupt you, especially when it's by people that you love. It's one thing when it's a lively and interesting conversation. Then I get it. But even in just normal everyday communication, after asking so many people to stop with no avail, it gets to the point where you know nobody is really listening or cares what you have to say. I'm almost just tired of talking. But it's okay. I'm used to it. When I was in 10th grade, there was this freshman girl who had a pretty nice body in my photography class. Sometimes when she walked by the back table, like 3 or 4 of the guys there would slap her butt, and she would just keep walking solemnly. One day, I took her aside so no one was in earshot and asked her why she just lets them do that to her. And she said, "It's fine, I've had to deal with it since I was in middle school from them." This one makes me legitimately angry, guys. Anyone out there dealing with this kind of thing? This is absolutely not appropriate under any means. Do not feel that you need to accept this kind of behavior. There's always someone willing to help you in this situation. And if you're the one doing this and think it's funny, shame on you. When my boss told me a few weeks ago that I haven't been getting enough quotes to him and maybe this sales job isn't for me, but you're really a nice guy, I could not tell you how many times I've had someone say something negative followed up with, "But you're a really nice guy." Not quite "it's okay, I'm used to it," but pretty close. I'll listen to a friend of mine who has ADHD and Asperger's talk about his D&D stories, and he'll go on for a bit and then suddenly stop and say, "Sorry, I'm rambling." And you just know that he's been told to shut up or stop talking so many times now that he's used to having to stop talking because someone got frustrated with him rambling. Makes me sad that someone would tell this guy to shut up when he's clearly enjoying explaining his wild universes. Passion like that shouldn't be stifled. Constantly having different utilities cut off and multiple eviction threats from the landlord, and a large possibility of becoming homeless in the near future because whoever you live with would rather stock up on liquor than save for rent and bills. That seems almost too specific. I was walking into Walmart the other day when I saw a woman in her early 60s in a wheelchair trying to push herself up a hill against the wind with a basket on her lap. I said to her, "Pardon me, I don't mean to be rude, but would you like a hand?" And she said, "Oh no, it's all right, I'm used to it." I felt so guilty for how much I take my legs for granted. What a trooper she was. This kid I had in an after-school program was supposed to be picked up by his dad for the weekend. Basically talked all Friday about how much fun they were going to have. Well, Monday came and I found out the dad never showed. The kid seemed fine though, and when I tried to get if he was really okay, he said, "It's okay, I should be used to this by now." Also another kid I babysit, her mom is supposed to call on Sunday nights but skips many of them and just calls whenever she pleases really, and gets mad at the kid for not answering while in school. I asked her about it and she said it doesn't bother her because she's just so used to her mom being flaky and not calling at the agreed upon time. Why do deadbeat parents like that constantly gas up their kids and then let them down? If you're going to be a disappointment as a father, at least don't get the kids' hopes up when you know you're not going to follow through. My mom has some strong letting go issues since she had a rough childhood that resulted in her not letting me go to birthday parties, sleepovers, playdates, etc. when I was younger because she was afraid something was going to happen or that I would somehow embarrass myself for life. Around the 3rd grade, we had a new kid in class, and when it came around to birthday parties, everyone but me got an invite. The new kid noticed this after a while and was offended for me. When asked why I wasn't upset, I just stated that I was used to it. Even if I had gotten an invite, I would not be allowed to go. 8th grade teacher here. I have a student who recently told me that her mom cries every night as she goes through the week's budget trying to work out how much they can afford to eat that week. I asked her if she ever went hungry, because as her teacher, it's my duty to escalate when a child isn't having basic needs met, and whether she wanted to see the school counselor about the crying. Her response to both questions was, "It's okay, I'm used to it." It was honestly the most heartbreaking thing I'd ever heard. Later on, I found out that this girl only had half a buttered sandwich each day at school, which was to last her through recess and lunch, and always went to the library to read during breaks because she wanted to conserve her energy. All the teachers just thought she was a bookworm. In actual fact, she longed for friends but hadn't made any because they were all running around in the playground. We don't get a conclusion to this story, but I really hope the teacher followed through on making sure all the child's needs were met. I used to nanny this really sweet girl. In kindergarten or the 1st grade, the girl that sat next to her in class died in a freak accident. She'd recently, within the year or so, just lost grandparents, animals, and a family friend. I asked her how she was handling the loss of her friend and she responded, "I'm okay, I'm used to losing people close to me." Broke my heart. I work at Toys R Us. The saddest thing is a child who knows they're not the favorite saying that they get one $10 toy and their sibling gets many toys, all of which are over that price. I was like, oh, is it your brother's birthday? To this little girl who was getting one little doll when her brother was getting Nerf guns and video games. She looked at me and went, Mom and Grandma buy him everything he wants. I'm used to it. A story for a similar phrase. It's just easier this way. Cousin was getting married at her stepdad's ranch house and invited everybody, including her father and us. They had one of those through the years photo albums on the TV playing throughout the night. Despite the fact that her father raised her in a loving home till she was 16, there were absolutely no photos of her father anywhere in the video. Multiple people on both sides noticed. She was eventually confronted about it and said that it was put together by her mother and it wasn't worth arguing over. She then had her stepdad walk her down the aisle in front of her father. Nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers getting the living snot kicked out of them by violent, abusive people in the hospital, and the police doing absolutely nothing about all of it. I did security in an emergency ward, and I really was not prepared for how violent it was. Also, I was not prepared for how little the police did. It was practically impossible to get them to show up, and on the extremely rare occasions they did, they never arrested anyone. I remember the first day I was filling out an incident report where a nurse got knocked down flat. I'm apologizing to her, saying that I'd been on the phone and can't even get the police to show up. And she said, "That's okay, I'm used to it, and you better get used to it too." Wanting to hang out with someone and either they already have plans or you later find out they did something fun with your group of friends and they didn't invite you. Now I'll usually say, it's fine, go have fun, / glad you had fun, but it's not really fine. I've just gotten used to it. My mom had a stillborn daughter when I was in the 8th grade. A few years later, she tried again and got pregnant with triplet boys. One of them had developmental issues and apparently caused issues for the other two, and they were also stillborn. My sister and I felt horrible at the thought of losing so many siblings, and even worse for what our mom was going through all over again. Our stepdad was broken inside. He really wanted children of his own, and we all knew that. It's not that he loved us any less. He's a great man. Just that he always wanted to raise a child. A few years later, my mom got pregnant totally by accident. We were all talking one day and it slipped by my sister, "What if it happens again?" My mom's face got this really distant look and she just said, "It's okay, I'm used to it." I had to get up and go to the other room because I didn't want to be seen crying. However, there is a happy ending. Our little sister was born healthy. Minor birth complications, needing an immediate C-section, which terrified us. But she's 6 now and a bundle of energy that can rival any tornado. She's the accidental miracle and the best thing that's happened to the family. I'm really glad we got to get a happy ending squeezed somewhere in here. I knew this girl for like 10 years because of Girl Scouts, but didn't become real good friends until high school. I'd never had a sleepover with her outside of Girl Scout activities, and the first time I slept over, I could hear her dad screaming at her brothers for not cleaning up the game room and some other stuff, and then screaming at his wife, my Girl Scout leader, for whatever the boys did or didn't do. I was so scared, and my friend just kind of ignored it. I was like, wow, he sounds really upset. Are your brothers okay? And she basically told me it was a normal occurrence in her house. I remember walking out to go to the bathroom and one of her brothers, who likes to act like a tough guy, was crying and cleaning the bathroom. I always had a weird feeling about her dad. Like, he liked to act like the good, funny suburban Christian dad when everyone was around. But even when I was young, I felt like he was really condescending. No one in that family deserved that sort of treatment from him. One of the brothers had been adopted a few years prior from China, and I felt like he was so unfortunate to have such a horrible dad and a brother who took things out on him because he felt like crap too. Anyways, the saddest thing is when you learn your friends have 1 or 2 crappy parents who act horrible and they're so used to being screamed at all the time. For me, the saddest moments are when they can still have a normal expression while saying it. If someone says "I'm used to it" while crying, it kinda means they're not really used to it. There was a kid in my class when I was around 8 years old that was really unpopular because he was poor and often got bullied. After a while, he found his place as the guy that does stupid stuff and hurts himself to try and fit in. There was actually a toughness session, but in reality, it was just people beating the ever-loving crap out of him while he just stood there without reacting, as well as him putting out cigarettes using his arms and hands. Even let people whip him with long, thin branches while not reacting at all, just so he could fit in and have friends. I remember the teacher finding out and getting so incredibly angry at everyone and started yelling at our entire class in the middle of the class. He straight up begged her to stop blaming people as he'd finally found what he called friends. Anyway, she told him to pull up his sleeves and there were bloody whip marks, bruises, and burns all over his arms. The guy just looks at her with a smile and says that he's used to it and he's really happy. The teacher straight up starts to cry and pull him out of the class. Didn't see him for a long time after that because he got placed in a foster home, and as it turns out, he actually was used to it because he'd been beaten at home for as long as he could remember. Now that I'm older, I realize just how heartbreaking it would be to see a tortured 8-year-old boy act all happy because he managed to get fake friends by being beaten repeatedly. Nerve damage in my back. I've seen quite a few high-level doctors about it. Just went to see the last one before I knew there was nothing else I could do and know that it would never heal and I would be stuck this way forever. It was the first appointment my parents actually went to with me. In my mid-20s and don't live at home, but I guess after a few years, they were frustrated that I had never gotten any help. After a few hours there in a nerve conduction study that lasted almost 3 hours, no change. Nothing they can do to help. My mom and dad were upset when the doctor, seeming genuinely sorry, said there was nothing they could do. Having seen lots of doctors before this who all responded the same way over the last 2 years, I responded something like, "It's okay, doctor. I figured that's what you'd say. Just wanted to get a final opinion." Which sent my parents over the edge. I guess they expected something to happen or some magic surgery to exist. Not to be told by an expert, "Sorry, nothing we can do." And for me to be so nonchalant about it. It sucks, but I'm used to it. My stepdaughter came home from her boyfriend's house complaining of a headache. When I asked a few more questions, she finally told me he'd hit her really hard in the back of the head, had a big goose egg-sized lump and a scab. I was horrified and asked, why is she even still with him after that? She just said, "It's okay, I'm used to it." I wish I could do something to help with her self-esteem, but no matter what I tell her or how much I care about her, she needs to figure out how to love herself. When I was 15 or 16, my friends told this really big girl that I liked her as a joke. It was crappy, but she believed them. I flagged her down after gym class to tell her the truth, and when I did, she goes, "Yeah, it's okay. People don't ever have feelings for me. I'm used to pranks like this." I distinctly remember punching my friend that did that in the chest like 6 or 7 times during study hall the next period. It was heartbreaking. When I was 19 and dating my current partner, I was squatting in an abandoned, flea-infested, decaying house while I scraped by on food stamps and working 8 hours a week because my job was cutting everyone. A friend offered to let me move in with them for a while, but didn't want me to bring my best friend and last member of my family, my cat. I tried to take him to an animal rescue place, but the attendant decided that my cat was too aggressive after he manhandled him pretty hard. As I sat in my partner's car and held my cat's crate close to my heart, he lamented to me how unfair this all was and how he knew my cat meant everything to me, and how our only option seemed to be to take him to the shelter that told me point blank that if I took a cat there, they would kill him. I looked at him full of despair at the thought that I had failed my little buddy, who had been my constant companion through deaths and abandonment and homelessness, and honestly stated, "It's okay, I'm used to it." To me, it was Tuesday. To him, he was witnessing the saddest thing he had ever seen happening to someone he was quickly falling in love with, and he began to cry. I was so surprised by his reaction because why would anyone cry over me or my problems? The good news is my friend changed their mind and I got to keep him. And when I eventually moved in with my partner, he let me take him even though he's deathly allergic to cats. And we found ways to work around it for a number of years until my cat eventually passed away due to natural causes. I miss my little buddy, my constant companion, every day, but I'm so thankful I got the time with him that I did. I know how many people hate on cats and say they're horrible, but that cat was everything to me, the adorable little rascal, and he loved me in a way that I believe few people in this world get to experience from an animal. I'm that guy who always seems to be on the edge of friend groups, or at least I used to. I was that one who always got talked over by other people, or people wouldn't realize I was talking at all. I was just used to being that guy, the one who was just kind of there. Got to college and found a group of friends that I really do interact with, and it's amazing how different that is. Basically, whenever nobody bothers to learn how to say someone's name properly, especially if it's unusual or exotic for the area, it's a basic unit of respect and acknowledging someone as a person, learning to say their name correctly. I have a really unusual first and last name, and a lot of people who have known me for years, coworkers, etc., still don't say it correctly, despite multiple corrections. So I'm super conscientious of making sure I pronounce other people's names correctly. Often the response I get is a very surprised and grateful, "No one ever tries," which is pretty similar to "I'm used to it." I have a happy one to counterbalance such heartbreaking stories. I often go in the forest and dogs run up to me and want to jump up. I don't have the heart to say no because they look so happy to see me. The owners are always so embarrassed as I'll get a little money, but I tell them I work with animals, so I'm used to it. Met some great dogs this way. Yes, we get to end on a happy one, and there are dogs in it.
What was your best "you have no power here" moment? When I realized I could just hang up on my sister when she wanted to yell at me on the phone. As a 12-year-old, that was a powerful moment. My sister is 6 years older than me, so after she was 18 and out of the house, she realized she could talk to me any way she wanted, and if I wanted to say something back, she would run to our parents. Fast forward 6 years, her and my parents took me out to eat for my 18th birthday, and she caught an attitude and I cussed her out. She gets the fish look on her face and looks at my parents, at which my mom laughs, shrugs, and says, "He's an adult now and he's tired of your crap." This is funny. Me and my brother did not get along that much when we were younger, but the moment he moved out, we got a lot closer. Sometimes you just don't make good roommates with people. I worked at Domino's and there was this old lady who ordered from us a lot and was always unpleasant. One day she calls and makes an order she must make a lot because she knew exactly how much it was supposed to cost down to the penny. I put in her order and tell her how much it is, and she starts getting upset because the order is 2 cents more than what she usually pays, and starts accusing me of trying to steal money from her. She asks, "How much money do you make stealing 2 cents from every customer?" Well, if I was trying to steal money and I did it to 100 customers, I would have made a whole $2. I didn't know what to do because she wouldn't accept the order and it was exactly how much she thought it would be. And there's nothing I can do to remove 2 cents from an order, so I asked the manager and she just tells me to hang up. I was new at the time, and I'm guessing that this wasn't the first time the store got screwed over by this woman. It felt amazing, and that was the only time I had to deal with that customer. I used to work at a call center, and I loved hanging up on terrible customers. I once worked for a shady company that sold and repaired expensive American vacuum cleaners. I was the service manager. I had planned a 6-week scuba diving trip with a mate for 2 years. They were well aware of this and said it was fine. When the time came close, I put in my application for 6 weeks leave. I was called into the owner's office and was told that I could only take 3 weeks. I had saved up the time with their permission. I pointed this out and they were adamant that 3 weeks was the most that they were prepared to authorize. I even tried to negotiate them to 5 weeks, but they firmly rejected it. So I walked away from the office, wrote my resignation letter, and left. Had a great holiday diving the Great Barrier Reef. They rang me up weekly for a solid 3 months offering all sorts of incentives to come back, but by then I had already won a great government job. Screw you, Tony and Ann. If the military ever taught me anything, it's to get everything in writing. That, "Hey sir, I'm taking leave for the 4th of July for 4 weeks, and his, "Yeah, sure," in passing in February means nothing unless you have it in some form of physical writing. Email, paperwork, or whatever you have, document everything. I agree with this statement. Always create a paper trail at your job. It will most likely save your butt in the future. My boss sold the company, and about a week after the official switch to the new owners, he called me up and asked me to do something. I told him my consulting fees were $120 an hour. He didn't take me up on it, unfortunately. When I left a job, I was invited to meet the CEO because he was unhappy I was leaving and wanted to understand why. I explained that I was not being paid enough and the recently announced pay raise was not good enough. He got irritated and in a patronizing tone started trying to lecture me on how I should have handled the situation better. I interrupted him. He didn't like that. So I added, "I'm leaving, I have nothing to lose," and then informed him that I had already been let down over pay multiple times, had witnessed others trying to get more pay and being refused, so I had no interest in begging to be paid what I already deserved to be paid. At that company that I worked for, the managers just stopped giving exit interviews at all. It just became a big circus. Man, the only job I ever quit was also the only job that ever gave me an exit interview. I had nothing really to say, so I ended up just saying that the break room needed recycling bins. The interviewer was so confused. I had a friend who worked in the selling of online spicy content advertisements. He was making them millions a year via Cam and had all his clients up there spending. Repeatedly asked for a raise and they said that they couldn't afford it. He got another job that almost doubled his salary, and then he showed them the offer and asked for $10K more than they were offering, or he would go to the new firm with his clients. They cursed him out, told him that he was a traitor, and said that there were more dignified ways to do this. In the end though, they gave him the wage he wanted. He asked for it in writing and then he forwarded it to the rival firm to negotiate the original offer. They matched the additional $10K and he bounced anyway with his clients and got his old jerk bosses to help him get another $10K of salary at his new job. Had a client freak out on us and harass us with cell phone calls every few minutes because we couldn't accommodate her needs. She wanted to make her countertops larger than the actual slab of granite. You can't grow rock. So we just refused her deposit and told her not to call us anymore. She was speechless. She was trying to get a discount and now she had to start the whole process elsewhere. We don't abide by the customer is always right. Firing the customer is definitely a thing. Sometimes 20% of your business requires 80% of the effort. Businesses that want to do better look hard at that 20%. I did wedding photography for a few years before every person on the planet had a digital camera. During a consultation, the fiance asked me if I had an umbrella insurance policy in case they were disappointed with the photos and wanted to sue me. He wasn't joking. He called me later to let me know that they decided to choose me as their photographer. I told him thanks, but no thanks, citing creative differences. Some people are idiots. Reminds me of a story back when I was in high school. One of our extended group of friends was a semi-annoying guy most of us tolerated. We'll call him Todd. Todd got into a car accident with one of our other friends and came out with a couple of cuts and bruises. No big deal. A couple of months later, we were all joking around in front of another friend's place and are about to hop into another friend's car. Todd decides that this is a good time to say, "Hey, make sure you guys don't get into an accident. I didn't want to sue the other friend at the time, but it was probably a mistake. Could have gotten a lot of money." Friend with the car's mom hears that from the porch and runs over to cuss Todd out and informs my friend that since she pays for the insurance on the car, like a nice mom, Todd is banned from that vehicle, just in case because she doesn't want any bloody lawsuits. Everyone else in the friend group talks it over and agrees this is a sensible precaution. And that's the story of why Todd had to take the bus everywhere until he got his own car. Man, I think everyone's had a Todd in their friend group before. This was my last job. Was hired to be doing PC repair, only to be told an hour before my first shift that there wasn't any hours available for that, and that they could put me elsewhere. Begrudgingly I accepted as I turned down another position and needed the work. Fast forward a few months and the manager decides I'm going to be filling in for the only person handling shipping and receiving for this giant department store. Single-handedly with 3 days of training. So of course things aren't going well, as this is a 2-person position at minimum for 8 hours and I'm expected to do it in 6. The last day on the job, I'm swamped. Vendors are fighting with each other over the dock space and another manager comes up freaking out on me because I couldn't get the extra work done, and I told her repeatedly that I couldn't be done. Exasperated, I pleaded my case, to which she callously said, "I don't give a crap." Now I'm getting mad. She replied to me at this point and says, "Do you know who you're talking to?" I replied, "Yeah, the bee who now is running this poop show because I'm out." $11.35 an hour with my promised hours gutted was not worth it. I was hired to build a website. I knew basic HTML and was forced to apply. They wanted to pay me an hourly wage rather than actually getting a professional. In short, the site consisted of listing all the items they had for sale in pretty much a single table on the site. as they took old appliances, TVs, freezers, fridges, etc., and sold them to various third world countries. So I had to take the pictures of all the products to have the images on the sites. They give me a cheap camera that dies after every 2 pictures I take. Boss's wife and another random staff member are there. All they do is sit on their butts chatting and do no real work, leaving the actual work to the other staff. I point out that the camera is dead. They tell me that I'm lying. Suit yourself, I'll sit down and do nothing at all until the boss is back next week. The next day I'm told to do work, point out that the camera is still broken, and get told to take it back if I want to, but while I'm out of the office I'm not getting paid. So I stay sat down doing nothing. I will point out that the actual site was built in the first day. It was literally just a white page with their contact details on it and a list of the items and prices. Hardly some long drawn out thing that actually needed work. So the next day, guy comes in to look at the stock and buy some, and asked if we have a camera. I immediately offer him the one that was given and point out that it doesn't work, but if he can get it going, he's welcome to use it. Boss's wife states that it does in fact work and that I'm an idiot. Potential buyer looks it over for a few minutes, tells her rather bluntly that it doesn't work, and I grab my coat and tell her I'm done here as well. Boss did try calling me the week after to go back, but I had no intention of working in that office with her. Plus, what am I going to do once I've gotten the pictures anyways? I was hardly going to be kept on to take 1 picture every month or so. I would have probably stayed at that job if I was collecting a paycheck for doing nothing. My old job had so much downtime in between assignments that I started taking my laptop to work and editing my YouTube videos. I was able to put out so much content while still getting paid. I was working in retail and a customer walked up and asked if since the ATM was broken, if she could buy something then return it for cash. I had no clue, so I called over another employee who had been there for a while and they said no. Furious, she demanded to speak to our manager. We call over the supervisor of our section and he listened to her question and he said no. Furious, she demands his manager. He calls over the manager and she shows up. Surprising, the answer was no. Customer is red in the face and demands another manager. We call over another manager, wink wink. She asks again and he says no. When she said she wanted his manager, the owner said, "I'm the owner of this store. The answer is no. It's against company policy." She stormed out, surprisingly not asking for the CEO of the company. She didn't take no from 2 employees, 1 supervisor, 1 manager, or the owner. And Jesus freaking Christ, when you have 5 people of increasing power lined up telling you no, and there is a line of bored customers behind you, I think you need to stop. As someone who worked retail for many years, I will tell you, people will complain as long as they can if they think they can get what they want. I had found another job and was just waiting it out to get my bonus. For about 3 months, I was free to express myself in ways I wouldn't have otherwise. I had noticed that my vacation time had not been approved and normally I would have asked about it, but I decided to see how it might play out. My manager called me in about 2 weeks before my vacation to inform me that it was denied. I wasn't the least upset, but I informed her that I was going to take it anyways. She threatened me in every way under the sun, which only made me laugh at her. Everyone was surprised when I left her office smiling as they had heard her. I went to check my desk, printed off my resignation and gave it to her. Got my bonus, got my vacation, and also got an extra 2 weeks paid because I was going to a competitor and they didn't want me sharing information. I did something similar. I handed in my 2 weeks notice at this one place as I had already got hired in another city, and I was going to move. The manager, who was just the worst human being spreading misery in a bag of skin, tried to tell me that it's my responsibility to find and train a replacement. And if she doesn't like them, then I'll have to stay until she finds someone she does like. I told her straight up, in 2 weeks, I'm gone. Or you can fire me right now. I don't care. I'm not spending 1 second of my time finding a replacement. That's your problem. It's not my fault you're such an insufferable thunder bee that no one wants this job. At that point, she was actually yelling at me. I could no longer use this place as a reference, like I could possibly give a crap. I can't use my last job as a reference either. I made a TikTok video of myself flipping off every camera in the building on my last day. I also hid a bunch of comedic stickers of myself all over the building for people to randomly find. Company did restructuring and laid off about 30 of us. My boss, picture female Limburg, gave me my contract package, which also included a lecture of if I was a better worker, the company wouldn't be doing this. After a month, they realized it was a mistake and told us that they were nullifying our contracts and that we could have our jobs back. I said that my attorney wasn't aware of a contract nullification given in the language in the document. And if they didn't want to stand by their commitment, we had already retained counsel, so whatever would happen, would happen. They came back and said we could have another 1-year package over and above salary if we stayed for a full year. I quit on the 366th day, and my boss told me that she was hurt and that this was very hard for her. I just called her a psychopath and walked out of the building. I was in a wedding party, and there was a brief lull in between scheduled parts, and we were all just milling around waiting. The bridesmaid, known for being obnoxiously bossy, starts barking out orders to every single person. As soon as she's finished, the wedding planner, who was standing right behind her, says, "Nobody do any of that," and then told us to sit tight. It was great. There's always that one person that tries to take charge when somebody else is already in charge. Got out of the Army and joined the Air Force National Guard in my home state. 20 minutes after leaving my new base for the first time, I receive a phone call from a guy introducing himself as a sergeant first class from the Army Reserve, informing me that his system shows my name had been pulled from the reserve pool to deploy to Iraq within 3 months, and he congratulated me. I kindly informed him that 1, I had just returned from deployment before getting out and was still guaranteed more than 3 months stateside, and 2, I had enlisted in the Air Guard and therefore exempt. He got irritated, raises his tone of voice, and said, "Well, you better get that paperwork to me ASAP because my system says you're going." I told him I signed a contract which binds me to that, not your system. It's not my job to update to ensure your system is up to date. I give him the name of the organization I was now affiliated with, the city, the state I was in, and my recruiter's name, rank, and personal phone number. Now you have several different ways to contact who you need in order to get your system updated, and I just hung up on him. Question? Did you join the Air National Guard in part to keep what tried to happen from happening? Was this pretty common for the Army to try to reel people back in? No and no. I switched because as part of the out-processing from active duty, you had to schedule an appointment with the National Guard rep. This particular guy touted $20,000 bonus for my job in this particular group announcement. But when I went in for my appointment just 4 days later, suddenly it was gone. I didn't like being taken for a fool. The Air National Guard offered said enlisting bonus plus a little less grueling lifestyle. Overwhelming majority of inactive reserves for the armed forces never get recalled unless there's some nationally known and televised escalation in fighting, such as Iraq in 07 or 08. Or World War III breaks out suddenly and there's a huge demand for seasoned service members. Credit union tried to bill my father's estate for a card they wouldn't provide documentation for. I told them in detail why this wasn't going to happen. After my father passed away, there was a small amount of estate-related issues to take care of. I was the legal executor of his estate. While I was sorting through things, I started getting letters from a local credit union regarding a credit card account of his that they wanted paid off. Problem was, I could find no evidence on my end in all of my dad's paperwork of him having had that credit card. And though I knew he had a savings account with them, I didn't recall any prior bills from them regarding said credit card. And I had been handling his bills close to a year before his passing. I went in to ask for evidence and got told that only the CEO could handle the matter. She was on vacation that week, so I left my name and number to have her get back to me. When she finally got back to me, she didn't offer any evidence, but instead offered a number of demands that I immediately pay the money, and if there wasn't enough money in my dad's estate, I should sell the house that he owned for the alleged debt of $600. Pointing out that he had not, in fact, owned said house for quite some time by the time he died fell on deaf ears. The letters continued, some personally written and rather harassing in tone. I was feeling rather concerned as I didn't know exactly what they could do or what my options were. I know the smart thing would have been to retain an estate lawyer to handle it, but what do you do when you're not an attorney or don't have the money to retain one? I had been handling things myself as the most financially minded of my siblings, and trying to handle things as a matter of common sense and common decency. There wasn't a lot of assets or debts with the estate. It seems that it should have been pretty straightforward, and other than this case, all of it went smoothly. Fortunately, Oregon state laws are actually really easy to read for a layman. I spent several nights studying the various sections and determined exactly how things should go, and I wrote a letter, sent certified delivery with a return receipt, back to the credit union CEO. In the letter, I stated the following. First, that there is no evidence present for the claim. I was formally denying in my capacity as the executor, which the law allowed, with the window of opportunity of 30 days to appeal the decision in court. Second, that if she wished to make any appeal to me personally and save on the court fees, she needed to provide documentation of the account, including a record of all transactions and changes to justify the amount claimed. Naturally, I got a letter back 4 weeks later. It contained some paperwork, including the paperwork establishing my dad's savings account, but nothing establishing the credit card. Further, the letter stated that it would be too difficult to provide full records of all the transactions. Any bankers out there, take note, never tell a programmer that it's too difficult for you to access your own data. We know it's either BS or that you're admitting incompetence. This would have been a 5-minute database query for me, and that's if I had to look up the tables first. The letter reiterated the demand for immediate payment, again stating the house, which again, not actually my dad's, but she kept insisting it was, and said that it would need to be sold for payment. I wrote another letter. In this letter, I clarified several points for her. First, that as she had not provided the required documentation, she had not actually made an appeal that would be subject to evaluation, let alone acceptance. Therefore, the original denial of claim stood unchanged. Second, that it is not her place to determine my father's assets, as she is not the executor of state. Third, that even if her claim were to be granted, Oregon law requires 6 months from the descendant's passing to receive all claims before any of those claims may be paid out. And by demanding immediate payment, she was attempting to get me to break the law. Fourth, that Oregon law declares priority of claims by the nature of them, and credit card debts were ranked N, where the above included taxes, medical debts, and various other things. Even if her claim had been granted, she could not be paid unless there was money left after paying all the higher priority debts. And even if the house had been included, that wouldn't have been the case. And fifth, as the 1-month deadline for appealing in court would have expired by the time they received this letter, they had exhausted all of their legal options, and further attempt to pursue this claim would constitute unlawful harassment, and charges would be pressed in such an instance. I never heard back from her again. This was a massive W if I've ever seen one. Good on the OP, even though I didn't understand half of it.
Teachers of Reddit, what was the trashiest thing you've seen a parent do? I work at a school where over 80% of our population lives under the poverty line. I keep a cabinet full of hygiene products for kids to take. Deodorant, lotion, chapstick, hair gel, feminine hygiene products, shampoo, conditioner, those kinds of things, in travel sizes. Being a teen is hard enough without having to cope with hygiene problems due to a lack of funds at home. So one day the entire thing is empty. Odd. I refill the cabinet and 2 days later, all of it's gone again. I refill it with the last of my supplies and catch the kid in the act of sweeping everything in his bag. I stop him and take him into the other room to talk to him. He'd told his mother about the cabinet and she'd ordered him to bring her everything he could get. She was returning the items to Walmart for store credit to buy cigarettes and beer. I told him to tell her the cabinet's locked now. I bought a bike lock so it was not a lie. It was sickening. Mother came to a school sports day swigging from a bottle of wine. We always felt desperately sorry for her daughter, because whenever she returned to school following a holiday at home, this was boarding school, we had to wash all her clothes because they reeked of cigarettes. And this poor little girl was easily the most unhappy child I've ever seen. Woman I used to babysit for worked in a school as an assistant or something in Toronto. She always told this story about how the class rabbit would go home with a new kid each week. They kept trying to avoid giving one kid the bunny for the weekend because it was clear his home life wasn't the best. But they finally caved and let him take the rabbit home. The parents killed the rabbit and ate it. They killed the class bunny and fried it up for dinner. They weren't even ashamed when they told the teacher what happened on Monday. Said they were out of groceries or something. My mom's a teacher, and in order to talk to a parent about a child that was struggling due to the school environment, she arranged to meet at the parent's house. Keep in mind, this was scheduled in advance with a set time. The dad answered the door 100% naked and proceeded to have the meeting naked right there on the front porch. My mom doesn't do anything outside the school anymore. Well, in my profession, it's more often what the parents don't do that wins them the Parent of the Year award. But I do have a couple of Hall of Famers. I'm a special education teacher, so I deal with kids with all kinds of physical, emotional, and academic disabilities. I took care of a little girl who had a number of complications due to spina bifida. Her mother couldn't be bothered to take care of her. The girl wore diapers and was cathed. She requires 3 to 5 diaper changes a day. Mom would only send 5 diapers a week. The thing is, she was getting full services from her community, so she was being provided with plenty of supplies. We suspect Mom was probably selling the extras. I ended up just buying her diapers. Mom would not change her catheter regularly. We would change it out at school, but other than that, she'd go another 24 hours before a change out. Longer if it was a weekend. The smell from the infections she'd get after a weekend was horrendous. She had lice constantly and oozing bedbug sores. Mom would always just tell us to F off when we'd call her and tell her to take her to a doctor. Found out later in the year that she also had scabies. We offered to administer the medications and creams at school. Mom told us to go to hell. Girl would come to school in men's underwear, XXL shirts, and size 16 pants. She was 8. Finally discovered that her 9-year-old sister was changing her diapers and dressing her every day, and sister couldn't find any other cleanish clothes to put on her. Mom's response? I'm busy, I have to get to work in the mornings. Final straw was when the nurse discovered what appeared to be STD warts while changing her diaper one day. Nurse made for the 10th time another CPS report, but principal insisted that we call home and report our findings. Grandma found out, tipped off Mom, and Mom appeared at the school 15 minutes later, snatched up the kids and disappeared. Investigators showed up 15 minutes later, but Mom was already long gone. Never saw the kids again. Staff raised money to get an 8-year-old girl a winter coat. We live in rural Canada. Girl came to school the next day in a t-shirt in the dead of winter. Her mom wearing the brand new child-sized jacket. The principal confronted her about it, and Mom told her to F off, and anything her kids owned belonged to her and she could do with what she wanted. Child aid was called, and that student lives with a very nice foster family now. Mom was rail thin too. Looked like the stereotypical junkie archetype. The sleeves were 3 inches too short, didn't cover most of her stomach, and she couldn't do it up properly. Our vice principal is a former army sergeant who's built like a tank. He's well-liked and an amazing role model in a community where many of our kids don't have a good male role model. On several occasions, I've seen mothers step well over the line and make very sexual comments to him directly in front of their kids. I mean, in plain sight of their own children, and in ways the kids notice. He's always very respectful and often asks another staff member to join him if he sees one of these parents coming to talk. But it's pretty trashy when it comes to some of the innuendo I've overheard. These aren't jokes either. They try to get handsy with him too. My cousin is a teacher, and she once had a parent come to a parent-teacher conference extremely drunk, and right before the meeting, tried to pull out a bag of drugs and start doing them. Police were called, and so was CPS. The school also had to call 911 once because a parent overdosed in the parking lot while waiting to pick up their kid, and the poor kid was too young to understand why their mom was slumped over in their car. I'm a high school teacher, and one time a parent of a child who had been going back and forth with another child on social media came to school to confront the other girl. The mom ended up bursting into my classroom to try to fight one of my 9th grade girls, sending us into a lockdown until the woman was removed by the police. I do want to make clear that the systems in place have failed this woman, her family, and her friends at basically every level, and I can understand why she felt like she didn't trust any systems to handle the situation. By the end of the school year, this particular mother was helping chaperone events and was a good role model for our young people. Her daughter was one of the best performing students in the grade. I volunteer at after-school programs to help tutor. I had a student earlier this year. Good kid. Loves math, loves computers. Wants to be a programmer when he grows up. He's really struggling in 7th grade because he has no computer at home. We have to do his online assignments at the program, but we only meet twice a week. I pulled his mom aside and explained how he could be doing much better in school with some kind of PC and internet access at home. She says that she can't afford a computer. I tell her that for $200, I could piece all the parts together myself for a fully functional setup that would be sufficient for at least the next few years. I'd even build it with him so he could learn some extremely valuable information. I'd even front her half, but she would have to pay me back. She says no way, still out of her budget. Mind you, while we're having this conversation, she's barely looking up to speak to me, too busy scrolling through the gram on her iPhone. I say forget it, I'll do it myself. I managed to scrap all the parts together I'd need for free. I only had to buy the hard drive. The setup was really out of date, but still worked, and gave it to the kid, and he was thrilled. About a month later, I notice he's trying to finish all his homework at the program again. I ask his mom if everything's okay with the computer. She says it broke down. I say, okay, what happened? I'll pick it up and I'll try to fix it. She says she had to throw it away. I pull the kid aside and ask him. He tells me she sold it to her cousin for $50. I really don't like calling people trashy when they're apparently stuck in a culture of poverty. Maybe she needs that $50 for the light bill or groceries. But at the same time, she spends 3 times that amount on her cell phone each month. So it really just broke my heart. It was like she's doing everything in her power to ensure that her kid has no chance at a decent life. I work in a school in one of the most socially deprived areas of the UK. At Parents' Evening, we give every parent a printout of their child's grades in each subject, alongside their target grades. Last year, we had the parent of an 11-year-old respond to this printout by shouting, "What the F am I gonna do with this? I can't effing read, can I?" This was in front of other children, parents, and her child's teachers. I've worked in behavior units / juvies for a few years, so you can imagine the families we get. My personal favorites, number 1, took the kids out on the last day of term, pull into the driveway, and one of the kids' mothers is standing there, can of Monster in one hand, cigarette in the other, and wearing a miniskirt and knee-high boots in the middle of winter. Number 2, one grandparent used to come in wearing a dirty singlet with his belly hanging out, would try to kiss me and call me love, darling, and babe. And number 3, a kid left grounds without permission, so didn't have his phone or anything, which we confiscate. Mom came to pick it up, and when the principal tried to engage her in a conversation about her son's behavior, she attacked him with her handbag. I have 2. There's a parent who would walk through our closed campus every single day. As teachers, we're supposed to stop her because it's a closed campus. Every single day, she would pretend she didn't know the rules. We always knew it was the same parent because she would let her younger children who weren't in school yet ride around on their scooters ahead of her. One day she was walking through with a stroller. She was not paying attention and her freaking baby started falling out of the front of the stroller. I saw 4 teachers jump up to help the kid and the mom didn't even acknowledge. The other one happened directly to me during parent-teacher conferences. I was meeting with a mom and her live-in boyfriend about her son. At the end of the conference, I asked if they had any questions I could answer for them, and he started asking me personal questions and flirting with me. I deflected and told them I had more conferences. But other teachers have told me that parents have hit on them before, so it's probably pretty common. Not a teacher, but a college administrator. Parents will call in very frequently when there's an issue with their student's living situation. If they're a jerk, which is frequent, I quote FERPA to them. Best example, I had to bill a student for around $600 in damages to their room at the end of the year. Mom called me peeved off about this because they'd tried to repair the damages, but very poorly. She ended up yelling about this over the phone, and I reminded her that her son was 22 years old and that I could only talk with him about this. Kid calls me back the next day and apologizes for his mom being a jerk to me and asks if I'm able to just feed his mom a bunch of bull when she calls back. It's a weird line of work. Not a teacher, but my dad once worked as a groundskeeper at a primary school. Worst thing he ever saw was a guy dropping his daughter off to school, and before she went through the gate, her dad went through her school bag and took out all of her packed food and left eating it, essentially leaving her with nothing to eat that day. Dad said he was so angry that he wanted to knock the guy out right then and there for leaving his child with no food for the day. But he ended up going straight to the principal to tell them what he witnessed so it could be investigated properly and get the kid help. My kid went to the preschool run by the public school system. Every student there was either 3 or 4. One day, I saw one of his classmates' moms open the front passenger door. Kid climbed in and they drove off with the radio cranked and the little girl dancing on the seat leaning against the dashboard. The back seat was totally empty, not even a car seat. The next day, I offered the lady my other kid's seat. I'd buy another one on the way home. She told me to F off and drove away with her daughter again standing on the front seat. I let the principal know and we watched the car drive into traffic towards the highway. Day 3, I've called the police, but they'll only come out if I call during the pickup. Great, that'll only take 30 minutes for them to get here. After mom drives off with daughter dancing on the seat again, I tell the principal I'm reporting the mom to family services if she won't intervene. On day 4, a guy shows up in her car and comes nose to nose with me without even so much as an introduction. He says if I keep harassing his woman, I'll regret it. I tell the principal, nothing she can do. They stop bringing the kid to school after that. My mom is a middle school teacher. Just about every day, some crap parent doesn't come pick up their kids because they literally forgot about them or were passed out drunk or on drugs. Then the poor child gets sent to daycare, which is not free. Then the horrible parents complain about the charge. My mom has had to bring random kids home before who barely know the way home. It's really sad. Parent witness to an event, but not a teacher. My kid's very first day of school. She's 4.5. In the gym hall, all the kids and parents are in lines according to class, and one by one, the teachers come and take them away. Our group was last to go. As we're waiting, a guy storms in, clearly drunk, and starts shouting at a woman in the line. "Why the F didn't you tell me this was now? I've been looking everywhere, etc., etc." And he slapped the mom. Another dad in the line pulls drunk dad away and pushes him. He falls down on top of another kid. That mom screams. Drunk starts to run out. Squish kid's dad chasing him. He made it out of the gym, but then he got caught and had the crap kicked out of him in the school reception. Everyone is freaked out. Kids are crying. Then the very happy teacher who's completely unaware comes in. I start Googling prices for private schools. I work in a middle school with an elementary school next door. 2 girls from my school were arguing all day and told their parents about it when they got out of school. The parents proceeded to call their families up to the elementary school and fought in front of a bunch of kindergartners. Knives and everything. The cops were called, and I think some of the parents are still in jail for gun possession and parole violations. One of the kids was pulled from our school and put in foster care. My wife is a special education teacher at a school that's about a 50-50 mix between lower middle class and extreme poverty-stricken elementary student. One of her coworkers had a behavioral student that kept lashing out and having the cops called on them. His mom was never home as she was well known to be both addicted to meth and willing to sell herself to pay for said drugs. The last week of school this year, he started a bunch of fights and the principal decided to just suspend him for the last 3 days of school. The principal called to tell the mom, who was out of state and left their 8-year-old home alone, that the kid was suspended for the rest of the year. The mom responds over speaker that the school is run by dumb racist white women and she's gonna come over there and kick y'all white women's butts. And she just kept screaming that over and over. Mom is white. The kid is white. The principal hung up and CPS was called. Used to work with teenagers who had behavioral problems in a special school. One day, a student of mine had an outburst. He started punching staff and students alike while screaming. It took 5 male teachers to hold him down. The headmaster called his mom so she could pick him up. She had 10 minutes. If longer, we would call the cops. The mother arrived 8 minutes later. A woman in her late 40s with bleach blonde hair wearing a miniskirt and a crop top. She came in yelling and swearing at her son. She picked him up and smacked him on the back of the head while telling him he was a good-for-nothing idiot. I'm not a teacher, but my mother is. It was her birthday and I live 3 hours away from her. I drove to my parents' house unannounced to surprise her for her birthday. She was obviously working as it was school hours, so I drove to the school she works at just as they were finishing. I was heading to the staff room, which is behind the reception area. I was about to announce myself to the receptionist and ask to wait for my mom in the staff room when this angry as heck dad storms in. He was abusing the heck out of the poor receptionist because his daughter got in trouble for being a delinquent in class. The principal comes out and tries to defuse the situation, and a minute later, my mother comes in on her way to the staff room. It's hectic in there, and then all of a sudden, the angry dad headbutts the principal right in the face. My mother screams, and angry dad turns and takes 1 step towards her. Before he got any further, I, without thinking, punched that dude in the face and his nose disappeared. Police came shortly after and I wasn't charged. It was classified as restraining with reasonable force due to him headbutting. Happy birthday, Mom. I worked with infants in a daycare where 85% of the children were there on vouchers. The government was paying for their care because their parents couldn't. Had a mom who was 27 with 5 kids, newborn to 9-year-olds, all from different fathers. Every one of her children were mixed, but she was constantly talking about how much she hated black people. I was one of 5 other white women in a staff of 20, and she was not afraid to tell me she didn't trust the other black women with her newborn, who I practically raised from 4 weeks to nearly a year. She would only give the baby girl to me at drop-off and would often complain if she saw anyone else holding her. She would bring her kids in at opening, 6 a.m., and wouldn't come back until half an hour to an hour after closing, 6 p.m. Once, so late we had to call the police because we thought she'd abandoned them. She talked about how she wasn't making enough money and could hardly pay her rent, but always had fresh nails and went to the hair salon monthly. Her 2-year-old had very coily mixed hair and would come in with mats, tangles, and week-old braids. Some of the other black women who knew how to take care of that kind of hair would do so during the day, and the mom was always pissed about it and accused them of trying to tell her how to raise her daughter. My last day at that job, I told my director about her racist comments and behavior towards the other women, so she pulls the mom into her office to talk about it when she picked up her kids that day, late as per usual. A week after that, I had a coworker text me and tell me she pulled all 5 of her kids from the daycare. I never saw the little one again and think about her often. She's gonna be 2 soon. I hope she's doing okay. Not a teacher, but a parent. There's this one child that my daughter's been going to school with since kindergarten. She's, for lack of a nicer term, a bit of a jerk. I hear stories from my daughter and her friends, and whenever I come to their school to eat lunch with my kid or help out, this other girl is always like, "Why are you even here? Don't you have something better to do?" Anyway, one day I roll up to drop off in the AM. It's December in Wisconsin. This girl is running around in a tank top. I'm like, "Dude, where's your coat?" Apparently, mom lost it. Dropped her off at school not only without it, but in a tank top. I ran into her and her mom at TJ Maxx once and everything made sense. She looked cracked out of her mind. Not a teacher, but my mom is. She teaches the visually impaired. There are these 2 students of hers whose parents, mainly the mom, tell them that they can't do anything and won't be able to do anything, and all they do while at home is sit around because their mom makes them. However, my mom has been teaching them for about 4 years, trying to get them to believe in themselves. It mostly has worked, but recently a different teacher told them that they can't do anything as well. So that has been a huge setback for them. I just think that it's really trashy for a parent to tell their kids that they can't do anything, even though they can do many things that other people can. Last year, I taught 5th grade. I had a student for 1 block a day that was a little mentally unstable. She developed a crush on another girl and began writing a ton of creepy notes. The school was handling it, but apparently the second girl's mother didn't think that was enough, so they drove to the first girl's bus stop in the morning and started yelling and threatening her. They basically had her cornered when the bus driver showed up and had to pry this raging mom away from the student.
What is the dumbest but 100% serious thing that someone has said to you? My sister thought diet pills were low-calorie pills. Her actual quote was, "Wait, diet pills aren't for losing weight? They're not just a healthier version of regular pills?" Is it bad that I understand how she could get confused? You stupid idiot. How can there be shadows on the moon if there's no gravity? Working in retail, and a customer came up to me and said in a very angry tone, "What is that noise? You need to tell your manager to fix whatever that is." That's rain. It's raining outside, lady. I will say, when I worked at a big warehouse store, when it rained hard, it was pretty loud. We were in a car and an ambulance passed us with its lights on. My friend turned to me with a very serious look on her face and asked, "If you were a blind and deaf car driver, how could you know how to pull over for the ambulance?" That became her senior quote. I had a similar thought the other day. My younger sister asked me why ambulances have flashing lights. I said that it was to get the attention of drivers, especially those that may be deaf. I then thought to myself, the loud sirens must be to get the attention of blind drivers. You would think that blind driving is an obvious no-no, right? Well, I learned recently that blind people can legally get a license to carry, which is pretty wild to me. My then 16-year-old sister once told me while cutting an onion, "God, why do they put the paper on these onions so tight?" She actually thought the skin of an onion was some kind of wrapper. I used to work in a kitchen, and one of the pot washers was cleaning a slicer and not exactly being careful. I told him the correct way to do it, so he didn't chance cutting any of his fingers. With a straight face and being completely serious, he told me that he didn't care if he cut his fingers off. It would just grow back, like a starfish. Hi, is this the Krusty Krab?
No, this is Patrick.
I was once told that substance dogs at the airport, schools, etc. were addicted to the substance they were looking for, so each airport had a different dog for each substance. This person was a university graduate. They were probably really wasted while watching that episode of Family Guy where Brian becomes a substance-sniffing dog and gets addicted to a certain powder. I bet they saw that episode on TikTok, and then there was Subway Surfer and someone cutting soap next to it. This happened last night at the bar I work at. I get a ticket for 2 Chardonnays, one with ice. Alright, one with ice. And one as it's supposed to be. There we go. 3 minutes later, in storms a lady with 2 wine glasses in her hand. Look at this, she says, and somewhat slams the glasses onto the bar. I am a little shocked that the glasses didn't break, and I did as I was told. I looked at the glasses. Yes, one Chardonnay with ice and one without. What's the matter, ma'am? I ask. Why did she get more wine than me? She asked, annoyed. More wine? I ask. There's not more in either one. Both have 120 milliliters exactly, as it's supposed to be. Would you like some ice too? But that one is fuller, and she points at the one with ice. Yes, it has ice in it, I reply. Why does she get more wine with the ice? Why don't I get more wine? Look, this one has that much more wine. Showing the difference between the glasses by pinching her fingers. Well, you get where this is going. This lady didn't understand that if you fill 2 glasses of wine and add ice to one, the ice will make it look fuller. But it's just because the ice takes up space. I had to literally show her that it's just the ice making it look like the glass is fuller, which it of course was, but didn't have more wine. Even then, I think she still thought she was being mistreated. When you have to explain Archimedes' freaking principle to an irate customer, you should win a prize. Doing so sounds frustrating enough in a normal setting. Now picture a crowded bar, 2 rows of people waiting to order drinks, a ticket machine spitting out orders from the terrace and the seating area. But damn, I wanted to end this lady. In the end, I took out the ice from the glass, told her, look, the same. Now I add the ice, just the ice, and there you go. I didn't add more wine, did I? And then she sorta agreed and sat her butt back down. Still don't think she trusted me on the there is no more wine in it part. If I ever open up a service-based business, I figure each of my employees should get 1 F off per year of service. It will be well advertised to our customers that if you are the lucky recipient of said F off, you should assume that you're the worst customer that employee has dealt with in the last year. And you should ban yourself from the premises. While working at my first library job, there was this young college girl, I'm assuming freshman, who came into the public library for some books for class. She seemed to be doing fine, so I leave her alone until she repeatedly makes very frustrated noises, so I offer my help. Can I help you find something? I need the Korean Bible. The Bible in Korean? Yes. We might have that in the international collection. Follow me. I go to said collection and do not find the Bible in Korean. I offer her the Bible in other languages or a novel in Korean. On seeing the text of the Korean novel, she looks very confused. No, this isn't it. I need the Korean Bible. Right, so you basically need the Bible written in the Korean language. No, I need the Korean Bible. It's like the Bible, but it's in Arab. Me trying not to facepalm. Do you perhaps mean the Quran? This is also the same job where my 6-year-old boss asked me what pitcher and catcher meant on a gay blog she happened upon. And when I explained, she very cheerfully walked away saying, well, 'tis better to give than receive. Heard 2 girls talking on the bus to my class. Girl 1, let's go to Hawaii this summer. Girl 2, I wish. I don't like to fly though. Girl 1, it's fine. I think the bridge is almost finished. We can just drive. These girls were students at a university. Okay, so after reading this, I instantly Googled how long that drive would be if a bridge existed, and I found this comment. Okay, I'll bite. I'm not gonna take the it's impossible end of story route here. We all know that's true. Assume, despite all the engineering challenges, someone found a way to safely build a bridge between San Francisco and Honolulu that didn't bankrupt the United States in the process. Consider that it is roughly 2,400 miles between San Francisco and Honolulu. That's roughly the same distance between San Francisco and Detroit. And Google Maps says that it'll take 35 hours to get there, without rest stops or meal stops or hotel stops. Assuming the highway is built to federal interstate standards, I would imagine it would take about that long to get there, again, without stops. Probably about 4 days or so if they actually built ref stops on the bridge. But if you had one bad accident on that bridge, I would expect the time to multiply exponentially.
So when is the tow truck gonna get here?
AAA says sometime tomorrow. A friend thought human specimen plus store-bought chicken egg equaled a live creature. But in reality, it's just really salty scrambled eggs. Excuse me, can you tell me where Half Dome is? I was outside the Ahwahnee in Yosemite and just pointed at it.
Is it behind the mountain?
The mountain is Half Dome.
Oh, I thought Half Dome was a rock.
It's a really big rock. The sad thing is I know Yosemite employees get questions like this all the time. In the valley, I only carry my climbing ropes inside a rope bag, so people don't ask me questions like this nearly as much. Knew a pathological liar in high school, told everyone she was allergic to peanuts and forbade anyone to have peanuts even in the same room as her. One day I saw her eating Reese's peanut butter cups and my friends and I said, "Aren't you deathly allergic to peanuts?" To which she replied, "They use different kinds of peanuts in Reese's that I'm not allergic to." My grandma said she was allergic to peanuts, yet ate peanut butter all the time. She said it was the solid texture of peanuts that made her allergic. I mean, I loved my grandparents, but what the hell? I know all about pathological liars. I used to work with a guy that said he couldn't wear silver watches because his sweat melted them, and if he wore a gold watch, it would make the watch spin out of control like a time travel movie effect. A customer brought in an iPhone with standing water in it. I showed them and explained that is why the phone is no longer turned on. He proceeded to yell at me in front of other customers. "I have a PhD and I can guarantee you water does not do things like that to electronics." I said, "All right," and just returned his phone to him. It's obvious that his supposed PhD degree was a blanket response to any verbal conflict, but even if he did have a PhD, how exactly would that make him qualified in other subjects than the one he studied? Maybe his PhD stood for a pretty huge dent in his head. A friend was totally confident he would be able to survive a plane crash because of his tuck and roll technique. He was 100% sober. Until probably 12 or 13 years old, I was pretty confident I could jump before hitting the ground, in the case of a plummeting elevator or plane crash. I was sure that I could survive a flood no problem if I just put on pull floaties on my arms. I drove past an IKEA dealership the other day with my wife, and she just started freaking out. She yelled, "When did that get there? Can we go?" Then she got really quiet and looked away. I paused and then realized what happened and say, "You thought that was IKEA, yeah?" We've driven past that dealership almost every day for over a year. Marriage, a lifetime of one person saying stupid stuff for the other to mock them about it, and vice versa. It's beautiful. When my husband and I were still dating, we were watching TV and a commercial for the Curious Case of Benjamin Button movie came on. About a minute after it was over, we had the following conversation. Him, "So is that real?" Me, "Is what real?" Like, do people get the disease that Benjamin Button had? Are you asking if people are born old and then age into babies? Yeah, you're right. Never mind. Forget I asked. I have never forgotten that he asked. I've been a cook for 15 years. One time a server asked me to rush a chicken breast she forgot to ring in. I said, "Okay, it'll be a few minutes. It's still a bit raw." "Just give it to me, it's fine," she says. I tell her that I don't feel like giving anyone salmonella poisoning today and she will have to wait. Her jaw drops and her face turns red. She rather belligerently shouts just to give it to her because she's losing tip money. Then adds, "Besides, people don't get salmonella poisoning from chickens, they get it from salmon. You're a cook, you should know that by now." Every person in the room did the slow neck turn of "what the hell did I just hear?" and just stared at her. Dude, it's not a joking matter. Chickenella poisoning is serious. I used to work at Best Buy and I had a customer, lady in her 30s, come in with her plasma television on a flat cart. She says, "I need the plasma refill." So I give her the old customer service fake laugh because I thought it had to be a joke. But the look on her face and the pissed tone showed me that she was serious. I took her to the home theater department and from a distance I can hear her going off about plasma refill prices. Or shouldn't the warranty cover the plasma? I used to work at a plasma donation clinic. For those who aren't aware, it's part of your blood. And at the place I worked, it was used specifically to help people with immune disorders. We would tell people this when it was their first time. And there's posters all over the place about specific kinds of people it helped. I had someone who was donating ask if there was any way to track his plasma so that he could buy the TV that it was used in. These stories just made me look up at the old plasma TV I have hanging on my wall. My uncle once said, The Earth is flat and the edges are covered with heavy layers of snow that no one can cross. He also said that the moon landing was fake, gravity is fake, and airline companies are in on a conspiracy and so much more. It was a very fun argument, I'll tell you that. You can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. Wait, gravity is fake? I'm curious how that uncle explained why we aren't all floating around then. A girl I once had to work with kept bringing bottles of Pepsi frozen solid to work. One day I finally asked why she freezes them, and she says you take away all the carbs by doing it. You remove all the carbohydrates by removing the carbonation. That chick was dense. You should have played along. If you remove all the carbon, it isn't organic anymore. I had a guy in a pub, completely adamant to the point of red-faced anger, swearing on the Bible that you could see New York from the Dongle Coast on a good clear day. I was in tears laughing. For those who have no idea what the Dongle Coast was, like myself, it is apparently in Ireland. A woman can become pregnant from touching a man's hands. Grade school teacher in Argentina. A woman stopped me in the grocery store when I was in my early teens to tell me that I could cure my acne by rubbing lady juice all over it. I assure you, she was dead serious. Before finding out that the woman was serious, I was curious if that was some form of flirting. It didn't happen to me firsthand, but a friend from New Mexico was asked while in another state if they spoke English, if they needed a passport to visit the US, and if the water is drinkable in New Mexico. I live in New Mexico. I get those questions a lot when I go even a couple of states away. It's more common than you'd think. Well, I live in a state where cowboys are really popular, and when I travel, I've met people who are surprised that I drive a car and not ride a horse everywhere. Do you know how expensive it is to take care of a horse? My stepmom, as she ripped the bandage off my sister's third-degree burn. It just needs fresh air. She then made my sister clean the chicken coop with a large, now exposed burn wound. Of course it got infected, almost killed my sister. She recovered, thankfully. Another gem from the same woman, while scolding us for getting bored and asking to leave after 4 hours in a museum, we could have gone to see Lewis and Clark's first plane. With my extensive experience with fairy tales, it tells me that your stepmom is trying to kill you. Watch out for any friendly woodsmen, and make sure you always carry rocks with you. And of course, know where the local dwarves are. Also, only eat apples that are uniformly colored. My brain automatically went to, don't touch my exposed area, stepmom. I really need to get off the internet. Years ago, while working at a cafe, a couple came up to me and asked me if Saddam Hussein was Russian. The Iraq war had just begun, so I snickered and said, of course not. The boyfriend turned to his girlfriend with a smug, victorious look and said, see, I told you he was German. If you're not Russian, you're obviously German. I don't see how they got that wrong. I've posted this before on Reddit at some point, but it's perfect for this question. My college assigns emails with your first initial, middle initial, then last name. So my email ended up being Dr. Last Name at college, as my first and middle initials are D and R. I jokingly told two dudes that I was with and how people I email think I'm a doctorate. One of them got up to go to the bathroom, and the other one was real quiet for a few seconds and then said, so did you work for the school over the summer? How did you become a doctor? It was the first week of freshman year, and I was 18. I had one quirky professor who would refer to all of his students as Doctor, their last name, in class. After that semester ended, I kept running into former classmates while hanging out with friends, and they would always call me Doctor, my last name. I also worked on campus as a tutor, so while out drinking with friends, I would hear some guy yelling, Dr. OP, hey! And my friends would say, wait, you have a PhD? And I would say, no, it's just some crazy guy. Then the guy would come up to me and say how much I helped him learn math and how I'm an awesome teacher. After he left, my friends were convinced that I was a math teacher with a PhD, and for some reason I was lying about it. This was reinforced each time we saw another one of my classmates, and they'd do the same thing. Hey now, superheroes aren't the only people that need secret identities. Teachers need them nowadays too. My mom worked at a credit union and had a member ask if she could deposit cash through the mobile deposit. My old roommate when choosing from a bowl of candy. I've decided I'm gonna go with Starburst instead of Twix because the fruit is healthier than chocolate. She was dead serious. Here in the UK, we got a lot of American kids shows, especially big ones like SpongeBob, Animaniacs, etc. These shows normally have the 4th of July special about the Declaration and War of Independence. With that as a topic of conversation, this is the genuine discussion I had with someone when I was 14. Me. The Simpsons made a joke about that during episode of 4th of July I forgot the name of. Friend. Yeah, I watched that one. The British sound like jerks. Me, slow blinking. Come again? You know, the British. The guys they always talk about when they do those kind of specials. I bet we could take them. Me again. Daniel, what country do we live in? Friend. England? Cue very quick explanation of British geography, with Daniel refusing to believe he was British until he went home and asked his mum. You should get off your tablet while it's storming. Lightning could travel through the Wi-Fi and shock you. My mother. I was once making small talk with an acquaintance, and I told her that I had flown out to visit my family in Korea over the summer. She got this smug grin on her face and said, "You can't fly to Korea, it's an island." My son was born on February 29th. Woman asked me if he needed to have 5 actual birthdays before starting kindergarten, or if he could still go when he was 5 years old. My friend said this once, "I don't worry about the price of gas going up. I only ever put $20 in at a time." Evolution isn't real. We just hatched out of eggs one day. A girl at my school. I used to work at a call center for a wireless service provider. A woman called in inquiring about how much we charged to use her phone while she was traveling internationally. I said it depends on the country and asked where she was headed. As serious as can be, she responds with, "Wyoming." I barely got to my mute button before I erupted in laughter. And in case you're curious, I did not mishear her, nor was she calling from outside the US. I clarified with her. She legitimately thought Wyoming was a different country. Plus, if you could hear how she talked and stuff, you literally wouldn't even give her the benefit of the doubt. When I was in China, some guy asked me if I wanted to learn English. I told him that I live in Canada, so I already know English. He was curious why I spoke English in Canada instead of Canadese. About a year ago, dude flipped open his flip phone during the daytime and started taking a picture of the moon that was clearly visible. We lock eyes before he snaps the photo and he says to me, "This happens only once every hundreds of years." I just kept walking. One night I was working at T-Bell. This girl comes through the drive-thru absolutely hammered. She was destroyed. She kept yelling at us to give her French fries. I just kept telling her that we don't sell French fries. Finally, my manager comes over and gives her the side of Fiesta potatoes and says these are Mexican French fries. I almost cried laughing so hard. And in case you're curious, yes, we did report her for driving wasted. Sometimes it depends on the manager working, but we usually report all wasted drivers at Taco Bell. I hate to be that guy, but Taco Bell does actually serve French fries. It's those nacho fries or whatever they're called. I was giving tours at my college geology museum. An older woman asked me to show her around. I was showing her our best show pieces when we got to this large quartz crystal. She then proceeds to ooh and ah, and showed me that one of the facets of the peak had 7 edges. She then tells me that she could channel spirits through the crystal's facet and began speaking in tongues. I walked away and asked if anyone else would like a tour. In middle school, took a road trip with my best friend and her parents from the Midwest to Disney World in Florida. They had family in Georgia, so we stopped for a visit on our way through. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to enter their trailer because I was a northerner. They were eventually convinced to let me in when I told them that I was born in New Mexico, which wasn't a state during the Civil War, so therefore, I was technically not a northerner. It blows my mind that there are still people like this in America. While driving, I see windmills across the hilltops and point them out. My girlfriend, "Oh, cool! Why did they need to make wind though?" She's a special one.
Fellow teachers of Reddit, what experience have you had with dumb parents? I substituted in a high school for 5 months to finish off the year for a teacher who was on maternity leave. So I had a student, high school senior, who never did any homework, accounted for 35% of the total grade. I would constantly send emails to the parents who always responded that they'd deal with it. Spoke with the parents at conferences and kept the admin in the loop. 1 week before finals, I sent the notice home that she needed to get a 97 on the final to pass the class and get the credits she needed for graduation. And I even gave her one more chance to turn in past homework for 50% credit. Fast forward to the final, she barely gets a passing grade and therefore can't get the credits, can't graduate, can't enlist in the Air Force like she had intended. The parents come into the office of the school screaming at everyone that they had no clue it would come to this. When we all sat down in the office with the guidance counselor, principal, department head, and myself, I reviewed the several notices with them, explained that she had multiple opportunities to gain credit, etc., but refused to do anything. Turns out the wife was hiding the emails and information from her husband and wanted her daughter to fail so she wouldn't join the Air Force and move away from home. Last I heard from the situation, they're not together. The daughter is working at Lowe's, never finished high school, and has 2 kids and multiple arrests for selling drugs. There's a reason I didn't want to pursue teaching as a career after that. We had a parent instigate an investigation into bullying, formal complaint, restorative meetings, etc. because her son was on the playground after school, and one of the older children wanted to get past him and said, "Excuse me, little one." She said that by not using his name, the older child didn't know it, he was bullying her son. I taught English in Colombia for a summer and had some pretty interesting interactions. One particular set of parents insisted that their son was a brilliant genius who didn't need to study. He rarely came to class and therefore could barely speak any English, while the rest of his classmates could speak full basic sentences. I emailed his parents my concerns for his apparent lack of motivation, and they told me that he could speak perfect English and didn't need to come to class, so they let him skip. Finally, parent-instructor conferences time came and I asked them to bring their son. I asked him in English, "How's English class coming along?" He stared blankly and just started crying. "Told you so." Just before Christmas break, I had the students hand in a paper. One of the students was missing a page, so I pulled out the contact sheet that I had the students fill out at the beginning of the year and gave a call. The student's father picked up the line and said, "Thanks for calling. We'll definitely get that extra page into you." The next day, the student's mother comes storming into the classroom. She happens to be an education assistant at the school. She demands to know where I got that number. I said her son had put it on the contact sheet. Apparently, the parents are separated. She proceeded to tell me that I had no right to call that number, and that when there's a problem with her son, only she has the right to know. I told her, "Thanks, that's good to know." That's when she dropped this bombshell. "If he hands in something that's incomplete, you fail him. You got that? Fail." Then she walked out of the classroom. This coming from a person who's supposed to help children succeed. I wouldn't actually call them dumb parents, but parents who are in denial about who their child actually is break my heart. For instance, we had a student who had an abundance of markers for autism and was in 6th grade. All the teachers on the student's team agreed they ought to tell the parents their concerns and suggest the student be tested so we could offer more resources for the student. The teacher who spoke with them was very polite and very kind in suggesting they try and figure out how best to help the student. And the mom literally screamed at her that nothing is wrong with her child and that she would never get the student tested. Her husband even tried to tell her that it wasn't a bad thing and they should try and see if it would help, since his teachers who knew him thought it might. The mom started cussing out the teacher and stormed out. I teach in a college, so the students are almost always 18 or over. A couple years ago, one student's mother called the chair of my department to complain on behalf of her daughter about the difficulty of some of the work listed on my syllabus. My chair was baffled and asked the mother if her daughter was over 18. The mother replied that her daughter was 20 years old. My chair explained that it was then her daughter's responsibility to either speak with me directly or withdraw from the course. That's it. That's all. It's college. People only go if they want to. No one's mother can do anything about the workload. I had a student who I caught plagiarizing in an essay. The 0 was going to cause the student to not graduate on time. The parent called a meeting, but I had proof of action thanks to turnitin.com. I explained the assignment and I showed the parent my proof, and that's when she said, "But I wrote that part of the essay, not my daughter, so she didn't cheat, I did." 4-day weekend. Come back on Monday to 50 emails. Generally, we have 10 to 15 in my group. My voicemail had 10 messages. I had not gotten a voicemail once in my entire time at my school. A parent flipping out that their student is failing. How stupid I was for not allowing their student to do the work. How ridiculous I was that I could not give her student another chance. Last email and voicemail is husband apologizing because I'm not the teacher of this student. Got confused with the last name, I guess. Had 2 girls in my English class who obviously hated each other. They would exchange glares, talk a little too loudly about each other while in the same vicinity, etc. I talked to them about it separately and they both responded with, I hate that stupid witch. Notified admin of the situation and called the parents. Next day, they decided to fight it out in class. After breaking it up, I find out that girl number 1 was accusing the other girl of wearing, quote, butt pads to make her butt look better. After discussing it with her parents, girl number 1's mom told her that only hoes wear butt pads and that she should do something about it. The butt pad girl, girl number 2, swore she wasn't wearing butt pads and that it was all natural. After telling her parents about it, they advised her to mess up that witch for talking smack. And that is how you end up with a fight in class over butt pads instigated by parents. Taught college, so my story is nice. Had a student failing horribly, less than 10%, but would not drop. Whatever, not my dime, not my problem. Anyway, grades come in and I guess his mother has the password to his account. Or perhaps he just told her his grade, F obviously. And I get an angry email insisting that there's no way he could have failed pre-calculus. Because my God, his father's an engineer and the student wants to be an engineer and he just has to be good at math. The best part is when you turn 18 and go to college, you're treated as an adult, even if you don't act like one. And there's a little box you check that says, allow my parents to see my records. Most kids don't check it, and by law, I'm not allowed to release any records to anyone, even parents. So I politely informed her that her son is considered an adult and I was not allowed to release any records and that she would have to contact him. Of course, this prompted a long, I'm going to get you fired, that I forwarded to my dean who came to my office for a long laugh. I actually feel pretty bad for the kid. Having a helicopter mom like that at that age will do him no favors. When I was a student teacher, we were preparing for parent-teacher interviews. My cooperating teacher and the VPs had to have a discussion with me in regards to meeting with one particular parent. Basically, let my cooperating teacher do all the talking. Usually I'd be expected to take the lead as I'd been planning and teaching the course at this point for a while. Because if we say the wrong thing, it's entirely possible that the kid will be showing up to school with bruises the next day. Apparently, the administration had already been involved with this individual and police multiple times before. In the end, everything turned out okay, as far as I know. I believe the student went on to graduate that year. Still something that sticks with me as a reminder that the profession isn't just lessons and grading. There's some real stuff that goes down occasionally. The dumbest parents I have experience with are really the ones I had no experience with. I generally have about 150 students at any given quarter, and parent-teacher conferences twice a year. I never get more than 6 parents. The past quarter was my worst ever. 1 parent showed up. What bothers me even more is that I teach middle school, an age group that really doesn't want to be in school, in an inner-city district, adding even more to students' drive. A complete lack of interest in your kid's education is the dumbest thing I can think of. Not me, but from a coworker of mine. She informed a parent that her 3rd grader was struggling with multiplication and division. She suggested that the parent work with the child on these skills. The parent refused because she never learned how to multiply or divide. Therefore, it had no practical use and she didn't see the big deal. I had a 5th grader blow up on me, shouting and screaming in the hallway. This was sort of the final straw for him. He had a long history of verbal abuse of staff in the school, and he was suspended for 6 days. State law allows the parents to have an informal meeting with the teacher and the principal of the school. Mom and Dad come into this meeting with myself, the principal, and the guidance counselor. Principal introduces everyone. Mom interrupts saying she has a major concern that needs to be addressed immediately. She accused the principal of being an imposter and demanded that everyone in the room take out their driver's license to prove that we are who we say we are. We all refused and she batted about this for 10 minutes or so. Over the course of the next 45 minutes, she ranted about how the principal was an imposter and that this imposter principal, myself, and the superintendent were involved in a conspiracy to remove her son from the school. My first year of teaching, I had a student who was constantly sleeping in class. I called home about it and the mother said that he was always on his computer or watching TV at night and she couldn't get him to stop. I was only 23 at the time and didn't feel confident enough to tell a parent how to be a parent. But if that happened now, I'd calmly tell the parent to go into the room and remove the offending technology. I had a kid that was very angry, got in fights with kids and teachers and so on. I worked with this kid and we were making a lot of progress. His mom believes in not sharing your feelings and keeping things bottled up. So she told him not to talk to me about his feelings anymore. For a year, anytime I tried to talk to him, he'd say, "Mom says I don't have to talk about my feelings, so I'm not going to." And I'd patiently tell him, okay. He got progressively worse and had such a hard year that year. After he came back from summer, he came up to me and gave me a hug and told me thank you for helping him. The next year, he did amazing. I'm really happy for him. But his mom really stunted his growth with her own fears of being open and vulnerable. She never liked me and my hippie ways. I work as an assistant at an art studio and we have a 7-year-old with seizure syndrome. Except I'm pretty sure she doesn't actually have it. I think she only had one seizure once and her mom freaked out and had her diagnosed. Now, this little girl loved to terrorize her mother. She's told me that. She looked up at me with her big brown eyes, gigantic toothy smile, and told me that she likes messing with her mom and making her angry, because her mom is too protective and one of those hovercopter parents. So this little girl just jerks her mom every which way, and it's hilarious because her mom is just like that. Overbearing, extremely protective, and really, really bossy. She'll tell the main teacher and I how to teach her daughter, how to draw, and how many colors to use, etc., etc., etc. But we don't have to retaliate or even say anything because her daughter does it for us. That little girl is fantastic. My uncle was a teacher in a school for troubled kids for about 10 years, elementary. One day, a kid starts talking about how the plants in Dare are all over his house. My uncle, being a longtime surfer and product of the 70s, didn't say anything at first. Then, during a parent-teacher conference, the parents are just being flat out uncooperative. "It ain't my son's fault. You failing him. That on you. He do his homework. I see him." "Ma'am, he needs more Nah, you don't know what you're talking about. How'd you even be a teacher when you don't know nothing? I know you're cultivating marijuana at the same home where your son lives." Boom. He said she got a look on her face that was just priceless, like she had just pooped her pants. Then he told her, get rid of the plants, today, and sit down with your son and help him with his work. Or else. My mother is a K-12 teacher for a charter school that does homeschooling with the teacher checking in and reviewing things about once a week. It's meant for students who have difficulty in the public school system, which can range from dropouts to super smart kids to non-English speakers, and parents who don't have the time to do full homeschool. I used to help with grading the math and science and stuff, so I have tons of stories. One parent during the school year kept taking her daughter on trips to different countries, and then asking my mother to extend her work. We're talking about 5 or 6 trips during the year. That would be fine if it was laid out at the start of the school year and they could schedule accordingly. But this parent would take these trips spontaneously. Like, in a few days we're going to Russia, so she can't meet you next week like we scheduled 2 days ago. Another parent really peeved off my mother. 2 kids, brothers, both seniors, almost done with high school. All that was left was some sort of state testing done in a classroom. One brother shows up, but the other isn't there. My mom, the proctor for the exam, asks where his brother is. He replies, "He didn't feel like coming." She tells him that this is all he needs to graduate, so text him and get him to come here. He doesn't show. Halfway through the test, the kid's mother storms in the door, yelling at my mother, telling her off for making her son feel ashamed and humiliated. She flips a table over, no joke, grabs her son that's there, who looked like he wanted to die, keep in mind he's a senior, like 17 years old or so, and storms out of the door. Both brothers failed to get their high school degree as neither had completed the state test. The crazy mom then writes a scathing email to my mother's supervisor, talking about how she'd been lying to her, disregarding her problems and her children's education, and attempting to sabotage their chance at graduation. A 16-year-old freshman girl is constantly skipping class and starts failing at the beginning of the year. I call mother to inform her about missing class and missing grades. The mother puts me on speakerphone without telling me that the kid is listening on the conversation. I tell her that I'm concerned about the kid's attendance and seemingly poor academic habits. The mother blows up at me saying that I shouldn't worry about her attendance because it's not my business. She then says that she's self-employed and frequently far from the school and can't take the time to deal with her daughter's school issues. She later transfers out of my class to another teacher's. She failed the class anyway. My mom is a kindergarten teacher. Just a few months ago, one parent asked her if it was alright if she came in and gave the kids henna tattoos for a Christmas party. My mom decided to give the kids permission slips in order to participate and mentioned that the tattoos would be about the size of a nickel and would be holiday themed. Another parent, upon reading the permission slip, came into the school and complained to the principal that my mother was trying to turn the kids Muslim. The principal essentially told her she was a moron and to screw off. Not me, but a situation that happened in my school. We get a new student the last week of May with only 4 weeks of school left. In this school year, this student has only attended 2.5 weeks of school due to school anxiety. He has a whole team of professionals, his mother, and a one-on-one aide that works with him. This is also his 3rd school, kicked out of his 2 previous ones, and he's in 2nd grade. He had a generally good first day. Fist bumped his teacher, did a little bit of stuff, then went home and told his mother that it was the worst day of his life. Mom comes to school all up in arms about how we're ruining her precious little snowflake. The next day, his classroom teacher tried to get him to do some writing with her. The kid looks straight in her eyes and says, "My mother said I don't have to do anything. Are you calling my mother a liar?" Cue mother the next day all up in arms because the teacher called my precious snowflake a liar. So, due to his school anxiety, he doesn't have to do any work, interact with teachers, make any movement whatsoever except sit like a lump in his seat. The teacher, when giving an assignment to the class, has to specify to him, but you don't have to do anything if you don't want to. It's by far the stupidest situation I've ever witnessed. I don't want to call any parents dumb. In my experience, they're mostly doing the best they can for their kids, even if that best isn't what we'd hope for. However, I did have a student who came to my student teaching classroom 2 grades below reading level, and similarly behind in other subjects. She really wanted to learn, but she had some cognitive issues that didn't qualify her for special ed, but meant that she required a lot of time and personal attention to learn well. For that entire school year, I worked individually with her before and after school, while she was waiting for the bus or after she'd been dropped off, and often during her recess and art/gym/library, which she asked me to do because she wanted to learn and wanted the one-on-one attention. She improved markedly in reading and writing, which is what we were concentrating on. She wasn't caught up at the end of the year, but she was a heck of a lot closer. She failed the year, but because she had a speech issue, her parents could decide to send her to the next grade anyway. I tried and tried to convince her parents that she should be held back a year, because with another year of intensive help, which I was going to find a way to secure for her, I thought that she could be close to or on grade level and could possibly keep up with the other students after that. They refused because they didn't want the other students to make fun of her. I have no idea what happened after that because I moved to another state, but I bet it wasn't good. Our AP US history teacher was going to quit teaching after this year because he'd become disillusioned with the whole routine, I guess. He didn't tell us this until right before the AP test, and luckily we reignited his love for teaching. He told us this. He's the only AP teacher who doesn't curve tests, and his tests are the hardest between the 3 AP USH teachers. So a lot of kids with his class end up losing their 4.0s. So apparently kids' parents were trying to get him fired for it or something. I thought that was pretty crazy. He's a really nice guy too. For me, someone who really dislikes history, memorization is tedious, his class ended up being my favorite class. I used to work at a daycare for kids aged 18 months to 3 years. There was this one little 3-year-old boy that used to call all the teacher stupid B words and C words. He also had extreme anger problems that led to violence towards the other kids. He would often hit, kick, spit, and choke out other kids. Despite this, he could be the absolute sweetest boy and craved being held by teachers in one-on-one time where he could get full undivided attention. We all dedicated ourselves to making sure we gave him special time to work on these issues. His dad was in jail and he would often talk about how scared he was to be put in prison and other issues at home. We discussed this with the mom and asked her to help with his anger by helping him find other ways of expressing it, as well as work on his swearing. All she said was she tries to work on his swearing, but he sees it on TV and she can't help that, and that he inherited his anger issues from his dad, who was both verbally and physically abusive towards her, hence why he was in jail. It was so frustrating to work with a woman who didn't think she could control what her 3-year-old son watched on TV and was resigned to believing her son's anger could not be controlled because of his dad. As a 3-year-old, he was mirroring actions he had seen, and she didn't understand that by teaching the child proper behavior and outlets for his anger, it would drastically improve. Once dad got out of jail, she pulled her son from school and moved to another state with the guy. I don't know if this is really dumb, but weird, I guess. I worked for a while as the assistant band director at a private high school, and one night after a football game, the director and myself were sitting in his office talking. One of the members of the band booster organization came in and closed the door and asked to talk with us. We agreed and gave him our full attention. He then explained how he had a marvelous plan that would help recruit for the band, which was to fix the election for homecoming queen. He told us that we could send mailers to every senior male, only senior males got to vote for homecoming queen, encouraging them to vote for one specific band girl, chosen by the band director of course, and also some kind of incentive such as coupons or monetary contribution. The band director and myself shared puzzled looks over his incredibly thought out plan on how to fix the homecoming queen race. He was convinced that through this we would raise awareness of the band program and then our numbers would skyrocket. We didn't tell him no, but we didn't tell him yes. Instead, we told him we'd think about it, and he left the office. After he left, the band director looked at me and said, "What the heck? No." I remember being 10 to 12 and having a student-led conference. It was going really well. Awesome grades, lots of friends, but I noticed a woman was being really mean to one of the teachers. And when my parents were talking to my teacher in private, part of the conference, she screamed, "My son is smarter than every kid in this room. This work is just not what he was made for. He deserves better." I went to a $30K a year private school and her son was very obviously disturbed in some way.
What's the worst case of rich kid syndrome you've ever seen? My roommate refused to go with his family for spring break since there wasn't a flight with first class seats and only business class was available. He ended up taking the connecting flight that did have first class available while the rest of his family just took business on the direct flight. You gotta be comfortable, you know, business class, the new cattle class. Wouldn't exactly call it rich kid syndrome, but it took me a little while to get used to my GF's lifestyle. I grew up in a very working class family, with both parents working full time just for us to stay afloat. Went around my GF's house and saw a lady making food in the kitchen. "You must be Mrs. Surname." Trying to be really polite, and I introduced myself to her family. That was actually their maid. It was awkward. Luckily, they're all really down to earth and stuff, cause turns out that her parents were basically homeless and living out of a storage space when they were my age. But her parents started up a little business and actually became really successful enough to support them. And they just kept growing. That makes sense. People who come from humble beginnings often turn out to become decent people when and if they get rich. The maid comment reminded me of this moment when I was traveling with my friends. For some context, I was the only Latino in the group of my mostly white friends, and on this trip we stayed at another friend's family's house. We woke up to an older Mexican woman cooking breakfast. She turned out to be their maid/cook, and this friend's mother said, "Oh my God, have you ever tried homemade tortillas? They are the best." My white friend slowly turns his head over to me, then back to the mom and says, "I'm pretty sure he has." I just smiled and she felt super embarrassed. It was a funny moment and she was super nice. The dude who relentlessly bullied me in school was also the son of one of the richest people in the city. One day a teacher caught him with his hands around my throat and I was pinned against a wall. We were both taken to the teacher's meeting room where it was explained to me that we should try to get along and that we should apologize to each other. Did I mention his dad also built the flashy new cafeteria for the school that year? He was caught on numerous occasions with me in some state of distress, and every time they found a way to make it both our problem. His dad pumped a lot of money into that school. He also flew his friends on his private airline to Manchester United games, so nobody stood up for me because they could lose their privileges. My saving grace was a lot of his mates in the early years of secondary school turned on him in the later years because he was such a jerk. But as you might tell, I'm still not over it. I feel this because I worked at a place that gave other people more chances than they deserved because that person knew people at the company. It's a crappy feeling when you get mistreated and no one has your back. Attended an international high school in Ho Chi Minh City where a lot of new wave millionaire kids live. The school was ridiculous, and a third of the kids were expats, perfectly lovely kids, and a third were local Vietnamese kids whose parents were working their butt offs to send them to this private school, and the other third were the millionaire kids. They would never hesitate to show off their mummy and daddy's wealth. They'd pull up to school in their Lamborghinis, Ferraris, etc. And if their Rolls Royce didn't come on time to pick them up from school, it would be a straight phone call to their other driver to come pick me up right now. They'd be such jerks 24/7 to the non-rich locals and constantly just bring up the most trivial things and complain about them. I'm literally not exaggerating here when I say this example. My maid bought me the wrong Louis Vuitton bag. I told her it was the tan brown one, not the light brown one. Ugh, I can't believe it. Now we have to send her on the jet to Shanghai to get another one. They all paid and used family connections to get into Harvard, Stanford, UPenn, etc. And even now constantly complain on Facebook and Instagram about how crap their resident hall food was. So they just hired some freaking personal chef or something. Mind you, these kids were the dumbest bunch I've ever seen. One of them literally was so clueless about the most basic facts, but still got into business management. Despised the lot of them. Glad I'm in Europe, far away from most of them. When I was in high school, if you just had a car that worked, you were popular. Group of rich high school kids in Montana out driving around, drinking. Found 2 combines, large farm tractor thingies, worth about $250,000 each, out in a wheat field. Decided to have a demolition derby. Got caught in the judge's chambers with the farmers who just wanted the damages reimbursed. The high-end family lawyers asked what the hell they were thinking when they did that. The response? Well, you can't put a price on a good time. Turns out that was the wrong answer. Man, this story ended on a cliffhanger. Did they go to jail? Did their family end up paying? I get enough incomplete stories from my anime. I don't need it on Reddit too. He was 25 when I knew him. His father owned the oil fields. He had credit cards that he used for anything and everything, that they paid the balance off every month. He never even kept track of what was charged on it. He just bought whatever caught his fancy. He openly and shamelessly admitted that he had offered his college professors money to give him passing grades. One day he was cranky about something and said, "I wish my parents would just die so I could have their money. Why should I have to wait?" Sounds like his parents should find out how he really feels and leave him with just $1 in the will. Back in high school, we were doing one of those icebreakers where you passed the beach ball around and whoever caught it had to answer the question their thumb landed on. Well, this kid who had proclaimed being rich numerous times before, talking about his parents owning a known pizza place and how he drives expensive sports cars, caught the ball, and his question was, if you won $1 million, what would you do with it? His response was somewhere along the lines of, $1 million wouldn't make any difference in my life. Thanks a lot, Brad. You just ruined the game. Stupid Brad, always messing things up. I once had a mom ask if I could open the back of our ambulance so her kid could see what was inside since he wanted to be a fireman. I'm a medic, not a firefighter. I agree as long as he doesn't touch anything. Of course, the second the door opens, the kid hops in and goes straight for our expensive monitor. I tell him no, that it's dangerous and it could break, to which he starts screaming, "I don't care, my mom will buy it." And the mom says, "It's fine, just let him play with it. If it breaks, I'll replace it." I had to physically pick him up and carry him out of the ambulance since she didn't try to control him. While this is happening, we get paged out for a call, and this lady suggests that she could pay double our hourly rate if we just stay for a few more minutes, just so her little punk could explore/destroy more of our equipment. Get the hell out of here with that crap, lady. You're willing to delay an ambulance so you won't have to deal with your precious little Joey's tantrum? Unbelievable. What would have been funny is if the kid used the shock panels and he flew out of the ambulance. A very distant relative of ours, some weird branch off the family tree, offered her son a bribe of an entire apartment building if he finished his undergraduate accounting degree. I just went, huh? So you get an immediate investment after graduating and you can rent out a place for mega dollars? My significant other has a rich aunt and uncle with only one kid. When he graduated college, his gift was a complex that brings in enough money for this kid to retire on. But if you ask him, he's self-made. I will never understand how rich kids can claim to be self-made. Maybe it's them just wanting to try and fit in. I don't know about rich, but just spoiled. My cousin insisted on a $15,000 wedding ring and a $30,000 wedding. She and the groom made $25,000 a year combined. Her dad paid for everything. They divorced within 6 months. Looks like she wanted a wedding, not a marriage. I have a kid in my MBA cohort that outsources his work and projects to India. He barked and moaned when one of our professors gave him a C when he only showed up to 2 classes after his dad donated $10,000 to the school. Overall nice guy, but doesn't have a clue. Had this one kid who dramatically threw down his smartphone on the ground in a mock frustration. Broken phone was replaced with few to no questions. I did that, but with an old flip phone so it didn't break. Got a few laughs when the battery flew out, and more when I picked it back up and it still worked. I chucked it halfway across the football field once, and that thing stayed intact. I went to middle/elementary school with some very wealthy people. Typically, I was oblivious enough to not realize it, but 2 instances come to mind. In 5th grade, we did an exchange trip type of thing with some kids in Canada. On the flight over there, one of the classmates said, "Wow, this is crazy. I've only ever flown first class before." Later, in 8th grade, I was at the same kid's house, an absolute mansion on top of a hill with the long landscaping entrance driveway, marbled floor entrance hall with stairs winding up either side, etc. And he and a girl, who had been dropped off in her dad's newer Ferrari, started having a discussion comparing the merits of their relatives' in-home movie theaters. Like, not just a living room with a cool AV setup, but full-on movie theaters with road seatings that could fit about 50 people. My family wasn't poor, but that was when I realized that we weren't rich either. I deliver pizzas in a very rich area. I'm talking seeing Rolls Royces and supercars on a daily basis kind of rich. My manager told me a story of someone that used to work there. This guy would deliver pizzas in a brand new BMW M3 and just put absolutely no effort into his job. Delivering pizzas isn't hard. Apparently this guy only had a job because his parents wouldn't pay his allowance if he didn't work. How much was his allowance, you ask? $5,000 a month. This guy was making $60,000 a year to deliver pizzas part-time. That's actually super common in wealthy families. An acquaintance of mine has the same deal with his parents. Work 40 hours a week and get $100,000 a year in allowance plus $15,000 a month for the mortgage being paid. Excuse me, $100,000 allowance? No wonder rich kids are out of touch. Brought my college roommate to my mom's house for Thanksgiving because he lived in a different state and I was only 15 minutes from campus. I gave him a quick tour of our house and he was astonished how clean it was. My mom's a neat freak and keeps a very clean house. He then said to my mom, "Wow, you guys must have a really good maid service." I've never seen my mom laugh that hard before. 2 girls, both nice and fairly level-headed, but also just raised too damn rich. One would take a taxi everywhere in town. It was a very safe small college town with the free campus buses, and she'd taxi across campus. She lived 2 blocks away from me and would take a taxi from her dorm to my house. Google Maps says it's a full 4-minute walk. She swore she had a terrible sense of direction and couldn't figure out where we lived. But you would think after that first embarrassingly short taxi ride, she'd throw on our address in Google Maps and just walk. The other would regularly complain about how not knowing how to manage their money. It took a while to figure out, But it eventually clicked that she meant very poor people didn't know how to invest their money in stocks and bonds. Then one day we were having a conversation where she revealed that she didn't think a house in Detroit in 2010 could possibly cost under $1 million. I told her I grew up in a nice $180K home and she thought I was dumb or lying. I shattered her world when I showed her my house on Zillow. When she graduated college, she complained about how much stuff cost all the time. It was nice seeing her learn the value of $1 finally. What do you think made the second girl finally come around? Was it just enough times of colliding with the real world? Her parents stopped paying her way after she got a job. She was probably making $70,000 to $80,000 in her first job, but she was living in Pasadena. She talked all the time about how poor she was and how she was living in an apartment above a garage. But at the time, I lived in an apartment with 5 other people and felt pretty wealthy, making $11 an hour, so I wasn't exactly heartbroken for her. Went to college with a totally chill dude who was apparently rich as freak. He was on our college golf team and enjoyed destroying a club if he hit a bad shot. He wasn't even angry, it was just like a reflex to go Bo Jackson over his knee or whatever. I asked him how he keeps playing and he basically said after every round he would just buy brand new clubs. He showed me in the trunk of his car that he had like 5 boxes of irons and always took the plastic off a new driver for every round. And he played every day at least 18 if not 36 holes. He said it wasn't even a rounding error in his dad's credit card. Jesus, I play golf and my golf clubs are really nice and custom fit to me, but that's because my dad is a PGA member and we get a sweet wholesale price. I can't imagine getting them replaced every day without it hurting, or even replacing them every year like some do. Kid in my high school crashed 6 cars within a year, and they weren't like 90s Toyotas and Hondas like most high schoolers have. These were brand new Subaru STIs, a BRZ, a BMW, brand new Jeep, stuff like that. The last car his dad bought him was a semi-new Ford Focus, a decent car, better than my 1997 white Camry. Every day he complained and threw a fit that his dad wouldn't buy him another $30,000+ car. Must be nice, I'm over here worrying about an oil leak on my car and the repair costs. I work with this guy. He recently proposed to a girl he dated for a few weeks with a $5K ring. He's 19 and we make less than $30,000 a year. They were married a month later. One of the kids in my grade bought bags of angel dust to senior prom. Not only did his parents let him go, the police did too. Now I believe he's in engineering program at Yale. A kid that used to work for me came in work super pissed off one day. I asked him what was wrong, to which he replied, "My freaking maid didn't make my bed again, and my dad still won't fire her." I used to work for a family that had a cleaning lady every other day. None of the kids made their own beds, made their own food, washed their own dishes, hell, never even loaded a dishwasher. They just left them on the table for someone else to pick up. They had never done their own laundry either. When the son had football practice, I watched a teenage boy have a goddamn meltdown, sobbing and cursing about their maid for not throwing his uniform into the wash, and he didn't know how to do it himself. Their 2 oldest are about to have a very interesting freshman year in college. When I was in college, I roomed with a girl like this. Her mom did everything for her to the point where she couldn't function like a normal adult. Like her mom would drive 11 hours to clean this woman's room for her, clean up her used pee-pee wrappers, etc. Her mom would get really snarky with me like a self-reliance was a loser quality. Also because it made her daughter look bad. While it was really easy to learn to wash your own clothes, etc., she couldn't do it and just said, "Oh, well, I won't have to. When I graduate, I'm gonna get a high-paying job and have everything done for me. I wasn't raised to be a domestic like you." Fun fact, I wasn't raised that way. I did my own cooking and laundry because my mom couldn't bother to do anything but watch soap operas and Lifetime movies. Fast forward to present day, guess who couldn't hack taking care of herself after college and had to move back in with her mom? This was all of my college roommates. They couldn't do laundry, pick up after themselves, clean dishes, or make themselves a freaking sandwich. The ones whose parents lived close by, their mommies would come and clean up their room and do their laundry. Came back from a music festival in Southeast Asia, got VIP tickets. I swear, this isn't about me. One of the other festival goers is a 20-something-year-old Asian girl who looks like she's straight out of that movie Crazy Rich Asians. This chick had a photographer following her around snapping pictures or posing in front of the stage with various acts, getting in the way of other people trying to dance. She asked security if she could get them to clear a section for her so she could get an unobstructed view of the stage for better photos. She bought a couple of bottles, 6 in total, for her table and again had the photographer take incredible photos of her posing with the bottles. She was incredibly rude to the waitstaff, snapping her fingers and in general talking to them like they were lower class citizens. She asked my maid and I, both Westerners, to hang with her and her mates at her table, and again have the photographer take photos of her posing with us at the table. The other 2 guys from the group, both Asian, approached us when they saw that we were at this table, and it looked like we had made some new friends. When they approached us, the girl and her friends got quiet, spoke amongst themselves in Indonesian, and basically shooed them away. We went with them after they did that and walked over to our friends. One of the guys is Indonesian, and he told us that she basically told them to get lost and know their place. I can confirm that this definitely happens in Indonesia. I lived there for a number of years, and the racial and financial segregation is nothing like any other country or culture I know. I traveled there with a Filipino friend of mine. He looks Filipino and sounds and acts Aussie. He dresses very well. I dress very casually. In all of the stores we went into, if it wasn't apparent that we were traveling together, he would have the staff members follow him around. In one store, I was invited to try a $40,000 watch on. I let the staff members know I had no intention of making a purchase, but they insisted that I give it a try. He was told they do not allow people to try on watches. Interesting place. I know a girl who comes from a multi-million-dollar family. She's made several blog posts about how she and her significant other were broke, spent the year living really lavishly, and that they were going to end up on the street because there was no place to live available in their price range. And she genuinely wanted to end herself. Turns out what she meant is that there wasn't anywhere available above the normal rent rate. Ended up in a top floor penthouse. Guess daddy came through? Neither of them work. Man, this story just straight annoyed me. My boss bought her kids a $2 million house to live in while they went to college. My boss also paid for their college. So of course, they moved out of the $2 million house 5 months later because they wanted to be independent. Oh yeah, and expected mommy and daddy to pay for their rent, utilities, college, cars, vacations to see friends in different states, etc. I would just stay in the $2 million house. Maybe start a crayfish farm in the backyard to help pay for the house. Crayfish racers will pay a lot of money for a fast crawl, Dad. Crayfish racing reminds me of Filthy Frank. Friend in college literally went to the local GameStop at midnight every Tuesday. He'd buy every new release for every console. We went over to his house one time that year, and he had about 60-ish games that were unopened. One time we were walking around campus and he stopped by the ATM. He got his receipt and called his dad. Turns out his dad was worried his funds were running low, so he sent him $25,000 just to make sure he wasn't going to starve. Had a friend in high school whose dad wasn't involved. He was raised middle class like myself and lived with his mom and stepdad. After high school, he worked towards becoming an electrician and was saving for his first apartment. His dad eventually came around when he was right out of high school and started giving him money here and there when he needed it. His dad owned a large company on the East Coast and was a multi-millionaire. Soon his dad convinced him to quit his trade work and gave him a job at his business. Shortly after, he was promoted to a managerial position that he wasn't qualified for, and paid way too much. He'd just get wasted while on conference calls and nobody questioned him since he was the boss's son. His dad bought him his first home, almost $500,000, and multiple cars. He took up horse racing and we quickly had nothing in common. Gone were the days of dumb teenage stuff, going fishing, hiking, playing video games together. He quickly found a girlfriend whose dad was also a multimillionaire. She was 30 and still putting everything on daddy's credit card. I couldn't keep up with their lifestyle and very quickly we faded as friends. After his girlfriend and him broke up, she told me that he was actually severely depressed and almost drove his car off a bridge multiple times. Deep down, he was having issues with wanting to live up to his dad's lifestyle and standards, but losing his old friends in life. It's too bad. I haven't seen him in probably 4 years now. We tried to reconnect a few times, but it just doesn't work anymore. Man, that's really sad. It's like his dad wanted to make up for the neglect with money. It's stories like these that tell you that money corrupts people. It's like all those YouTubers that got famous when they were really young, and a lot of them have just disappeared now, because they're probably broke.
When did your "something is very wrong here" feeling turn out to be true? A few years ago, about 1 a.m. Sunday morning, I had to take my dog out before bed. I live in a rough neighborhood and I am a female, so I usually have my guard up regardless of the time. Before I left the apartment building, my gut told me something was up. The street was completely void of traffic and people except for a van parked out to the side of the road. Outside of it were 3 people whom I quickly identified as male. Right away, my reaction is to keep my head low, put my jacket hood up, and not bring attention to myself. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see they were struggling. On closer inspection, I see 2 of the men are holding up the other man between them. I make the assumption that they're headed home after a night of heavy partying and they're just helping their friend get sick or something. I'm telling myself this to ease my fears. Then they notice me and they stop everything and freeze. I thought that was odd and no good, so I dragged my dog straight back to the building. I don't know if he even got the chance to pee that night. I go to bed and think nothing more of it, until it's time to take the dog out again in the morning. There was a notice in the elevator asking for witnesses as to exactly what I saw that evening, because a dead body had been found. So this wasn't a friend of theirs after all. They were ditching a body. Still upsets me to this day, and I will never ignore my intuition again. A storm was gathering as my dad was driving. I was 8, sitting in the back and looking out the window. I told him, "You better hurry, that construction crane looks like it might topple." Everybody laughed at the idiot kid. That evening, the whole family was watching the local news. They opened with that crane crashing down due to heavy wind. Although nobody had been hurt, I felt vindicated. I heard a strange noise when I woke up. I looked outside my bedroom window to see if anything there had made that noise, and saw my oldest cat sitting on the windowsill outside of the other bedroom. She was staring into the room as if there was something in there that she did not like at all but could not look away. At that moment, I knew there was something or someone in the other room. Then I heard the noise again. It was like a soft squeaking, like someone shifting his weight from one foot to the other on wooden floor. I don't have wooden floors. I told myself there could not be an intruder in that room. It makes no sense that someone could get in there without waking me up, and I gathered my courage and went to check it. When I got to the doorway, I saw 2 of my other cats in the hallway staring into the room, very agitated. I peeked around the corner and heard the squeaky noise again. It was one of my neighbor's cats, very afraid and being trapped on my desk by my cats. I grew up in a fairly quiet neighborhood, and when I was 12, we got our first dog. It was my job to take him for a walk every evening after dinner. This dog was the goofiest, sweetest golden retriever mix. Not a mean bone in his body. He never met a stranger, and when he would occasionally escape, we usually found him in a neighbor's yard playing with some kids. He was the farthest thing from a guard dog you can imagine. So I'm walking him one night after dinner by myself, and suddenly he stops dead in his tracks in the very middle of the sidewalk. Out of the trees lining the neighborhood, maybe 10 feet away from me, this guy just comes strolling on out. I was pretty skittish at that age, and I didn't like being alone with strange men, like at all, so I was immediately unnerved. The guy walked up to me and asked if my dog was friendly. I responded out of sheer anxious panic and said that yeah, he was. The guy reached out to pet him, though my dog snarled and snapped at his hand, which I had never seen him do before. I apologized, made some excuse I don't remember, and hurried away under the pretense of getting my vicious dog away from him. Turns out this dude was a predator who assaulted 3 other neighborhood kids in those trees, and my dog was probably the only reason I wasn't the 4th. When I was in university, I was walking home from the bars in the Bywood Market in Ottawa with my roommate at the time. It was about 2:30 a.m. and we were looking forward to getting home and ordering some pizza when we came across 2 guys and a very drunk girl. Initially, we didn't think anything about it because it was a pretty common sight on a Friday night. But as we walked behind them for a few minutes, we noticed how out of it she was. One of the guys was essentially carrying her, and her clutch was loosely dangling from her limp wrist. Our street came up, but instead of turning down it, we decided to see what was going on. The guys explained that she was one of their girlfriends and had had too much to drink, so they were taking her home. We asked them a few more questions. What bar they were at, where she lived, if she was an Ottawa U student, etc. They gave pretty convincing answers, but all the same seemed really uncomfortable and wanted us to go away. During the conversation, the guy holding his girlfriend shifted her position to get a better grip, which caused her arm to dangle down and drop her clutch. Before they could move, my roommate grabbed the clutch and took out her ID. My roommate then asked if they knew her first and last name along with her birthday. This is where things changed. The other guy got really aggressive and confrontational while the other was silent. They didn't know her name or birthday. I then pulled out my phone and called the police. The guy dropped her and they took off running. We waited with her for about 10 minutes until the police and EMS got there. We gave a statement but did not have much to go on other than their descriptions. Police told us they suspected she'd been dosed and that she was lucky we happened to be walking behind her. Pretty scary stuff. All the praise in the world to these two guys. Seriously, you guys are heroes. Too many people would have just taken it at face value and walked away, but you sensed something was wrong and followed through, and as a result protected this girl from a horrible experience. Got off the subway at night. There was one other person about a half a block behind me on my route home. This is a totally normal thing. Has happened thousands of times. Totally normal looking dude. Not even following me closely. I had a bad feeling. Such a bad feeling that when I turned the corner on my way home, I broke into a dead sprint and hid behind a dumpster in the shadows partway down the street. By the time he came around the corner, I was well hidden and could see him from my hiding place. As soon as I saw his reaction to the fact that I wasn't there, I knew I'd been right to hide. He started looking for me, muttering to himself. He went up and down the street, looking around corners. I hid and held my breath until he was gone. It was terrifying. I'm so glad I had that sudden, inexplicable impulse to hide and listen to it. This is another one of those times, guys. If your spider sense starts tingling, listen to it. My friends and I went on a booze run one night back in college. We live in Flint and we were at a friend's house in a relatively bad neighborhood. We had our friend who was 21 go in while the rest of us waited. As we're sitting in the parking lot, we notice a dude standing by the trunk of his car a few rows of parking spots ahead of us. I had a bad feeling about him, so I was watching him the entire time while my friends were all chatting it up and laughing. I noticed my other friend who was driving watching too. Sure enough, after watching us for a second, he pops the trunk, pulls out a pistol and starts walking towards us. We noped out of there and floored it around the parking lot right as our friend came outside, yelled for him to get in and sped off. Turns out there had been a ton of carjackings in that area over the last few months. Not me, but my mom. When I was about 10 years old, I got invited to spend the night at my really good friend's home. My mom said no. I begged her to let me go, but she was adamant that I couldn't. She said that she just didn't feel right about it and that no amount of pleading was going to change her mind. A few weeks later, my friend's dad was arrested for possession of illegal explicit material. After he went to trial, it was found that he had abused several young girls. He would have his daughter invite them over for a slumber party and then prey on them when they went to sleep. If my mom hadn't trusted her gut feeling, I could have been one of his victims. Several years ago on Thanksgiving, my mom was becoming extremely overwhelmed. The holidays have never been a great success in my family, and my parents had issues communicating, which led to a lot of stressful, intense dinners. And if it wasn't them, it was someone else starting a fire. Well, this year was bad. My mom had been cooking for hours to get ready to head over to my cousin's house. My dad was yelling about how we spend too much money on the holidays. It got to a point where my mom told me and my brothers to leave for the party ahead of them. We didn't get far from the house until a really bad feeling started sinking in my stomach. I knew my brothers felt something too. I said, "Can we go back?" And my older brother turned around immediately. When we got there, my father was gone. He had left out of anger and my mom yelled at him to leave. My mother was in her bed, laying still with an empty bottle of sleeping pills beside her. She was still conscious when we came in, but started shaking and was falling asleep. We called 911. I later learned that the pills she had taken would only have put her to sleep for a long time, not actually kill her, but clearly it was her intent. She's had severe depression and after this she got some real help. A little different perhaps, but I used to work for a company making barns. We were installing a rail made from old oil lines. I was using a large chop saw to cut the threaded ends off the pipe. A chop saw is basically a large gas-powered chainsaw with a 14-inch diameter fiber blade in this case. I'd gotten to the last cut and as I stood up, I had the weirdest feeling that something was wrong. Didn't know what, but I knew something was off. I looked around and checked my cut, which was good. Didn't mark the concrete below. Stood there for a solid 5 minutes with saw in my hands, trying to figure out what was wrong. All looked good until I moved the saw enough to notice a large hole burning in the shin of my jeans. Turns out I had stood in the sparks. Luckily, there was enough left for shorts. Oh, that's a close one. This one definitely could have ended a lot worse. I don't know if I had a something is very wrong feeling for this. However, I felt something was off. I was at my mechanic getting routine work done on my car during summertime. I noticed that he had a coat hanger and every single hanger had a well-worn coat on it. I thought it was odd and out of place, but figured it's a mechanic shop. They probably just leave it there from the wintertime. No biggie. Not too long afterwards, maybe a few months, there was a drug bust at the shop. They were using those jackets to hold heroin. Our mechanic is in jail now, and honestly, he was a good mechanic, so I was disappointed. Ironically, my pediatric doctor got busted for bribery to prescribe certain medications and is likely going to jail too. Never had a vibe out of him though. This sucks too, since he was a great doctor. When I was younger, we would go visit my aunt a lot. Her brother-in-law was often there and sometimes watched her kids for her. Well, me and my sister just really didn't like him. We told our mom he made us uncomfortable and that we didn't want to be around him, even though he never did or said anything bad to us. Sometime later, it was discovered that not only was he abusing his teenage daughter, but he and his girlfriend were also abusing my infant cousin and taking photos of it. He's in jail now for a very, very long time. When I was in high school, I had gone to a party with some friends. From the moment we got there, something felt off. I bugged my friends to leave and tried to explain that something just felt off. Well, I was able to bug them for all of us to leave by bribing them with some steak and shake. We found out the next day that a bunch of police came about 15 minutes after we left and arrested most of the kids as well as a group of guys who were caught abusing a girl while she was passed out drunk. So glad we got the F out of there. I was walking with my daughter last week and we heard a siren as we approached a crowded intersection. Instead of stepping close to the edge of the street and waiting for the walk light like usual, my daughter stopped well back on the edge of the grass and touched my arm so I would do the same. A full 30 seconds later, a police car came screeching through the traffic and drove onto the sidewalk to get around cars stopped at the light. If we had been in the customary pedestrian waiting spot, I don't know if he would have seen us, and I'm sure he wouldn't have been able to stop. I asked my daughter why she'd stopped so far back, and she said, "I don't know, I just knew we should." Smart kid. Not me, but my mom. And I'm doing my best to recall the story she mentioned to me a few months ago. My mom has been a psych nurse for over 30 years at a private hospital. One of the patients she was looking after was a very boisterous person in her 40s, and she'd been in the hospital for over a week. One night, Mom noticed this lady was very lethargic, saying that she was just feeling tired and was going to have an early night and to get her meds early. This isn't going where you expect. Mom thinks this is very odd for this lady, but everyone has off days, and so she gives this lady her medication and she goes off to bed. About 5 minutes pass and Mom still has a knot in her gut about this lady and thinks she'll just check on her stats. So she goes to her room where the lady is just about to lay down and checks her blood pressure, pulse, and oxygen saturation. This is pretty rarely done in a psych hospital unless people have other health concerns needing monitoring. This lady's oxygen saturation was down to around 80%, I believe. To put it in perspective, if it falls below 92%, your cells can't absorb oxygen, and this can cause permanent damage. Mom, in her over 40 years of nursing, has never seen someone with such a low level. She checks again and the same result. Mom calls an ambulance and gets this lady on oxygen. Later that night, Mom gets a call from the hospital the patient was sent to from the doctor, who lets my mom know the lady's fine. She had a blood clot. If she had been left for another 15 minutes, the doctor is certain she would have died. The lady made a full recovery and gave Mom a beautiful scarf the next time she saw her. I have two. First, when I was 5, my late grandma was staying with us. One night, I woke up to some noise and found my parents and grandma up. She told me to be quiet and I realized that there was someone trying to pick the lock on our flat's door. While this is happening, my father was loading his shotgun and telling my mother and us to keep away from the door. He opened the door suddenly and tried to hit the guy with the stock of the shotgun. He started to run and my father after him, but he got away. Later that night, I learned that my grandma couldn't fall asleep, feeling there was something wrong, and then heard what was going on at the door and woke my parents. And when I was in high school, she had a stroke and lost the ability to speak. Because she was illiterate, it was hard for us to understand what she was trying to say. One day, I went to school after preparing her breakfast as usual. When I arrived, there was this urge telling me to go back home. I tried to pass it as boredom, but it got to a point where I felt very agitated and told my friends I'm going back home and left. When I was walking back home, I found my grandma wandering around without anyone. I asked her what she's doing. She pointed out like she's out for a walk, but I knew back then she couldn't find her way back without anyone because of her stroke. So I walked with her for a while and we returned back to the house to very worried parents. This was before cell phones. I've never believed in the supernatural. I'm not a religious person, but I experienced this. I don't know what to call it. My oldest daughter stopped by my work one day and introduced me to her new boyfriend. He seemed a little off to me, but I decided it was just guy dating my daughter and let it go. Later, he met my wife and I, and she told me later that he seemed off to her too. She has pretty good instincts about people, so we decided to investigate him a bit. Typing his whole name into Google, the first result was a mugshot from a couple of years ago. The third was an active warrant. More searching resulted in finding 3 warrants from different counties, an extensive record, check deception, theft, driving while suspended, driving after a lifetime suspension, and driving while a habitual traffic offender, and a brand new marriage license for him and my daughter. They were going to get married later that week. We of course told her about him, but she insisted that he had already told her about all that and had taken care of it. We emailed links to her roommate who showed her, but she didn't have any luck talking her out of the relationship. They were in love and everything would work out okay in the end. We sent in an anonymous tip and he was arrested the next day at her apartment. My daughter then found out he'd been lying to her about pretty much everything. He had entangled her in a business he was trying to start that mostly involved her financing things for him, since his credit was trash due to records for bounced checks and theft. She's still working to untangle herself from that. He's still in jail and, according to her lawyer, will be for at least 2 years depending on what happens in 2 other counties. Thank God the parents followed through on their instinct on this one. Apparently, there was already some damage done, but it would have been so much worse if they didn't do anything. I had a math teacher in middle school who came off as creepy. He would try and get close to us guys and try and act like old friends. He seemed afraid of girls for some reason. I didn't like him. He gave me a very bad feeling. After about a year at our school, he wasn't there suddenly. We had a police officer come in and sit us down and interview everyone individually. It turns out he was caught having an inappropriate themed party with some of his former male students from his previous school. He was sent to prison. I got to the airport early and got something to eat at the restaurant, boarded the plane, and everyone is on and I suddenly get a feeling of panic. Nothing else, just panic. I was used to traveling 3/4 of the month back and forth every week, so no problems flying. But in this case, I had to get off that plane. I grabbed my stuff, ran past the flight attendant and said, "Don't wait for me, I'll get another flight," and sat down trying to calm down. An announcement comes over the speaker that they're looking for me and my flight is leaving. It leaves. I watched the flight start to take off. This was in Detroit, by the way. Then it happened. The worst cramps I ever had. Ran to the bathroom. Food poisoning from the restaurant. I would have been on a 2-hour flight, stinking up the plane while ejecting the contents of my stomach from both ends. I'm sure the entire passenger compartment thanks me, though they don't know. When I was a little kid, I stepped outside to walk home from my neighbors 2 doors over. I smelled what I knew was a bear, which are common where I live. If you've ever smelled a black bear, it's not that different from a skunk, which is what my friend's mom told me it probably was when I asked her to drive me home, even though my house was literally right around the corner. The thing is, a skunk's smell is strong, but it doesn't travel. A bear's smell is more permeating. Begrudgingly, she drove me only to see the bear sitting on my back steps outside the door I would have tried to enter my house with. Black bears aren't that vicious, but my friend's mom apologized immediately about not believing me. Could have walked straight into that thing at the age of 12. When I was doing my PhD, I got offered the chance to do a Central European University summer school program to do a course that would have been extremely valuable. I even got offered a full scholarship to do the course, and free accommodation, etc. A really amazing deal. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave, I said to my boyfriend at the time that something's telling me I shouldn't go. And I was like, WTF, brain? This is the opportunity of a lifetime. But the don't go feeling just kept getting stronger. So I withdrew from the course, feeling stupid for doing it. The day after I was scheduled to leave, my perfectly healthy mom got sick. A week later, she was in a coma. A week later, we had to turn off life support. Her funeral was a week after that. I would have been away in her last waking moments. I knew some people who were really into off-roading in modified Jeeps. Once, they were invited by a group of people I did not know to go up a mountain in Colorado. They chose not to go, and everyone in the 4 Jeeps that went got caught in an avalanche and died. At a research institute, I walked into a mouse procedure surgery room for a quick moment to grab something and leave. After walking out, I felt, well, to be honest, like I was a little high. There were 3 other people in that room, including 2 undergraduates, so I got worried and went back inside to check things out. When I got back inside, I asked if they were feeling okay. One of the undergrads turned to me and said she was fine, but was flushed and looked a little out of it. So I went around to all the isoflurane chambers, an odorless volatile liquid that KOs mammals at low doses and kills them at higher, looking for leaks. Sure enough, the gasket at the bottom of one of the chambers had failed and it was leaking out and immediately boiling into gas and filling the room. I told them that their isoflurane was leaking, and the postdoc told me they were fine and that he uses that machine all the time. He also pointed out that the isoflurane was in an air curtain biosafety cabinet, and so even with the leak, they were protected. I called him an idiot because a biosafety cabinet recirculates air and doesn't evacuate it like a fume hood, which is what he should have been using. So I ignored him, propped open the door, and ordered the undergrads to get out of the room. I then went to their lab manager and told her what I had found. Their lab manager came down like the wrath of God.
Where were you when 9/11 happened? In the forest, camping. No radio, no phone. I came back to civilization 5 days later. Everyone had processed what happened, as much as you would expect. I had not even heard about it, so I was out of sync with the world. Strange times. Man, you must have found a portal out there and accidentally traveled to a bad timeline. There's a really good podcast called 9/12, which is all about how we as a society reacted to 9/11. And one of the stories they tell is about people who were on a boat in the middle of the ocean filming some reality show. It sounds like your experience was very similar to those people. If I'm not mistaken, I think the MTV show The Real World was being filmed during 9/11 as well. I remember them giving them TVs to watch because the show usually didn't allow TVs and stuff in the house. Getting ready to pick up relatives at the airport in preparation for our wedding. How was the airport scene? Oh, their planes were grounded mid-flight. The wedding was canceled. I was pretty young during 9/11, so I wasn't a traveler at that point, but I did have some flights canceled at the start of C-19, and I remember it being a weird feeling. I can only imagine how it felt during 9/11. Under anesthesia at the Boston Children's Hospital, I woke up being moved into an elevator on a gurney. They had finished my surgery, but weren't bringing me to the recovery ward. Boston's Children's Hospital is a very tall building, and Boston had advised all buildings to evacuate all the floors above the 10th floor. So I was moved down to a lobby after my surgery. That's gotta be wild, going under in one reality and waking up in another. That's pretty much like anytime something happens during the night. That last statement is super true. My most recent experience with that was waking up in America and hearing about the earthquakes in Turkey. Not something anyone should have to wake up to. I was sleeping during the first plane, getting ready for work when the second hit. Went to work for 3 hours with no customers. Called the boss, he said close, and went home. Watched CNN and tried to convince my mom that I wasn't about to get drafted. Same, but in high school. Sleeping for the first plane, when waking up to my parents being like, what is going on? Saw the second plane hit. Went to school anyways. We spent all day in every class just watching the news. Sitting on our desks, on the floor, pacing around, just crawling in our own skins. Teachers and students alike. They let us ask questions and express our feelings to the best of everyone's abilities. Lunch period was surreal. There was silence. Not a single plane in the sky. Got in the car, turned on music, and then turned it off immediately. It felt disrespectful. Whatever fast food we got that day was just eaten in silence. So gut-wrenching. Remember it like it was yesterday. Similar, my brother was a truck driver and happened to be in New York State at the time. He called my dad at home. I watched the second plane hit live. I did go to school afterwards, but it was an odd day. I'm in Canada on the border with New York State, so we were glued to CNN. I vaguely remember seeing F-18s flying. I remember sitting in the library watching the news just talking about the events. My brother was stranded in the States for a week or so because the borders were closed. It was long enough over here in Australia. I had an American friend on the internet mention the first plane hit, promoting me to go and turn on the late night news. A few minutes after I started watching, the second plane hit live on TV. Before that, everyone still thought it must have been an accident. But when the second plane hit, we all knew what it meant. This was me at my school. The teachers turned on the news for about a minute before the second plane hit, so my homeroom class saw it happen. After that, the principal got on the PA and said to turn off all the TVs and go about the day as naturally as possible. I was mad when they did that. One of the biggest breaking news events in our lifetime, and they weren't letting us watch it because they were worried that we were scared. I was already scared, and keeping me in the dark made it worse. This must have been a tough situation for adults. I mean, I totally understand wanting to protect children from that madness. It's easily a traumatic experience. On the R train that just passed underneath the towers in Cortlandt Street, the conductor of the R train after mine was instructed to go straight through and not stop. They disobeyed that order and stopped, took on as many people as possible and got out of there. That conductor likely saved a lot of lives. There's almost no mention of that anywhere in the news. Oh my god, that's crazy. Incredibly heroic on their part. I was in Manhattan, watched the towers fall, heard the crowds that had gathered all down Fifth Avenue gasp and scream in unison as the first tower crumbled. Gathered in a packed bar with freaked out coworkers as we first saw the photo of Osama bin Laden on TV. Walked home to Queens with thousands of other shocked New Yorkers in eerie silence, with the occasional ghostly figure of a downtown worker covered in white dust. My ex-wife was in the second tower, got out when the first one was hit. Her brother was in the first tower. Luckily, he also got out. She was knocked down by the concussion of the tower falling. Some stranger picked her up by her elbows. It was her brother. She also had a few other heartwarming tidbits. As she walked home to Brooklyn, she had been breaking in new heels, and some dude in a corner store gave her a pair of flip-flops. They broke 3 blocks later, giving her her first post-9/11 laugh. She still has them today in her hope chest. She also said that people were turning radios to the streets, so she could get a running commentary about potential other attacks, and others were handing out bottles of water to newly minted pedestrian commuters. New Yorkers, man, complete jerks if you're in their way during rush hour. But if you yell help, the whole freaking city comes running. My kind of people. Came home from school, I was in the UK, age 12, with my mom watching it in her office on the 14-inch CRT television/VHS combo. Watched the second one hit. I remember saying, freaking hell, and for once not being told off for it. I have a similar story. I was 8 and also in the UK at the time. I used to go to a friend's house after school and get picked up by my mom after she finished work. I distinctly remember getting in trouble for calling the pilot a silly bastard for flying the plane into a building. I don't think anyone understood the magnitude of the situation at that point. Yeah, that's what I thought when the first plane hit. Some stupid idiot approaching the airport far too low. Then, oh god, this is deliberate, when the second plane hit. Then we got the news of the other planes and I was like, is the US being invaded? I was at home on the other side of the world trying to watch cartoons and being annoyed why I couldn't. I was 8 at the time. Same, 8-year-old Australian here, was totally mad that Pokemon wasn't on that morning. My parents had to sit me down and talk me through the tragedy that had just happened. I remember feeling sad, but also a little mad about missing Pokemon. I was in my mid-20s at the time and on the internet, when a friend in the US told me about the first plane impact. I turned on the late-night CNN feed. Channel 7 used to run it instead of infomercials. I don't remember for sure, but I think it was about 1 a.m. Melbourne time. I woke up my wife and told her I had just saw the start of World War III, and she said, huh? What? I'll just read about it in the morning, and went back to sleep. The next morning, she woke up and said, holy crap, you were serious? That's how I feel when anyone tells me anything while I'm half asleep. I was at the World Trade Center on 9/11 because I worked across the street. I was at the base of the South Tower when I saw the second plane go into the building, and I ran away toward the South Street Seaport. It had a huge impact on my life and still does, but I met the love of my life because of it, and now we have a son. I was thinking about it today because New York Magazine did a profile on us on Valentine's Day of 2002 and called it Love After 9/11. There was a lot of coverage after 9/11 on how many surviving firefighters ended up leaving their wives for the widows of their dead colleagues in the years after. Basically, they would be consoling the widows and form a bond over their shared grief. Strange effects of a terrible day. Trauma bonding is a real thing. If you've never heard of it, look it up. I was in the restaurant business at the time. Woke up to start getting ready to go to wine tasting at Windows of the World at 1 p.m., top floor of the North Tower. Then I turned on the TV. I had taken the evening class about 6 months earlier. If you worked at WOW, I'm sorry for the loss of your coworkers. Heather was a really amazing pastry chef. Wow, this imparts a strange feeling. For you to know and share the name of someone who passed away as the result of the attacks, it immediately humanizes it and makes it more personal instead of a thing that happened. Third day of high school in Long Island. Every TV was turned on around 8:50 a.m. My fourth period global teacher ran out of the class when the first tower fell. My sequential 2 math teacher still gave us a quiz that day. Kid behind me was crying the whole time. His parents worked at the World Trade Center. Never saw him again the following day. That next day, they sent the freshman class on a retreat to meet their fellow classmates, as we previously planned. It was quiet the whole time. In case anyone was curious, I don't remember the kid's name, and I'm pretty sure he lost both parents that day and already knew that they were gone. And he had told the math teacher, who was Mrs. Clean. So yes, she gave us the quiz and him with the possible knowledge of his parents being gone. My high school locked down, and they wouldn't tell us what happened until later in the day. It sucked because it made the whole day strange. Mine also locked down. I was 1 week into the 10th grade studying for my math class. That teacher said, "F that, this is history," and wheeled in a TV to the center of the board and turned it on. I stayed in that class for the next 3 periods. I often squatted in his room with some other people, until I got picked up. He still goes down as my favorite teacher. I was in college and my art history professor gave us a test that day. It was at 11 a.m. and all I remember is all of us sitting there just blinking and looking around. I was a sophomore, and someone asked our anthropology professor to turn on the TV. That was already in the classroom, so we could try to understand what was going on. She refused, but none of us really understood what was happening at that point. I had to watch the second plane hit while having breakfast at the main cafeteria a bit later. The TV was very smallish and attached to the wall where it met the ceiling, and it was always on mute. I remember that no one could get cell phone service all day. Aside from the usual contingent of future hipsters, most of the student body had cell phones, but they weren't at all the means of rapid information they are now. Man, I'm old. I don't think I had a cell phone during 9/11, but I think I remember hearing about how phone lines weren't working. Working at a bakery listening to the radio. I was 21. It reminded me of the War of the Worlds broadcast that I learned about in history class. I still wasn't sure it was real until I got home and saw it for myself. Driving to Rutgers University, about 30 miles from New York City, seeing a giant plume of smoke coming up and not realizing what it was from. I got to campus and was told classes were canceled and we were under attack. I had just woke up, turned on the radio, heard the DJ talking about the first plane hitting, then watched the second plane hit live on TV. I was on a plane halfway over the Atlantic from Germany going back to the US. The plane had to turn around and go back to Germany. I was 10 months old. I still have the passport with my 9/11/01 stamp on it. Wow, there's an amazing documentary about the emergency landings that had to take place at the airport in Canada because of the hijackings. It's an interesting story, but I'm glad your family was able to go back instead of having to deal with that. I was working in downtown Ottawa, Canada, for those that don't know, in a skyscraper when it came on the news after the first plane hit. I remember the first news saying that they thought it was a news helicopter that had accidentally hit one of the towers. I went to one of our boardrooms and saw the second tower hit live on TV on one of our massive projector screens. We were told to go home at some point after the news of other planes started coming down. Leaving our building and traveling through downtown was intense. We knew planes were being diverted, we didn't know if we were under attack too. I was 1 block away from Parliament Hill, and the streets were filled with military and heavily armed police vehicles. I also saw people jumping and the towers fall while it was being recorded live. Even though I wasn't in New York City, it was still an event experienced in real time. Some years, on September 11th, it hits harder for some reason. I was in the 5th grade, 5th floor math class looking out the window like usual at the Manhattan skyline from our school in Queens. We didn't see the first plane hit, but we did see the smoke and we pointed it out to our teacher and said that must be some kind of fire. I remember thinking, how the heck were the firemen going to spray water all the way to the top? Teacher next door came in and told our math teacher to turn on the radio. When the second plane hit, the radio went off, and soon after we were all called to the lunchroom. Some of the kids' names were called, and they were pulled to go to the principal's office afterwards. I found out that their parents had worked in the towers. It was very surreal not knowing what was going on and the teachers all huddling together whispering amongst themselves. After a few hours, they let us go home, and I ran home across the street and made it to the 5th floor apartment asking my mom what was going on, and if I could go to the roof and look at the skyline. I went up there by myself and it was the weirdest view I'd ever seen. The towers weren't there anymore. I stayed there for what felt like the rest of the day just looking at the smoke and fighter jets flying above me towards Manhattan. School days for the next few months were weird. We were like in this limbo where all we had to do was have positive talks about America and make "United we stand, divided we fall" posters to hang around town. But there was always an underlying feeling of hurt and sadness. Those were some strange days. At the exact moment, sleeping. I was in California, so I was still asleep at the time. I was in college and I overslept that day. Woke up and was in a rush to get to my first class. My roommate at the time was trying to show me something on TV that morning, but I was in so much of a rush I didn't pay attention to him and left for class. In the car, I had a CD playing. If I had the radio on, I probably would have heard it there. When I got to school, the parking lot was usually full, and running late meant you wouldn't be able to find a parking spot. But it was almost empty, and I was able to get a parking spot right up in front of the school. I should have known something was off, but I was just happy to be getting a good parking spot. I rushed to class, and when I got there, this class that usually had 50 students normally had about a half dozen people there. I said, "What's going on? Where is everybody?" That's when I finally found out what happened. The internet was a thing, and some people did have cell phones, but there wasn't constant communication like there is now, so I was able to go the whole morning without knowing. I was also in college and late for class that day, but still living at home. Flicked on the light bulb and it burned out. Went downstairs to get a new one and said, "Hey mom, the light burned out." And she said, "This is honestly the worst thing I've ever seen or heard." I was like, "Don't worry, I'm changing it now." 10 minutes later, idiot me figured out what she meant. She had saw the second plane hit. I remember for years waiting for things to settle down and get back to normal, and it just never did. So this is a genuine question. I was born in 2002 and always hear about people saying things never got back to normal after 9/11. But what changed? I realize airport security is very different now, but beyond that, I've never been able to grasp what people were talking about. Was it similar to the pandemic where it was just a fundamental culture shift that can't really be articulated? Or was it something more tangible than that? Well, this is my opinion as a Gen Xer, 1967. There was this aura of invincibility. The US takes the fight to you, and no one ever came to our house and picked a fight with America. The closest thing was Pearl Harbor, and you saw how things turned out for Japan. So don't even think about it. In that one act, America was no longer invincible. Also, it wasn't a country who did it, but a group of secret extremists. We were attacked by a ghost. The US was vulnerable to a ragtag group of misfits. What if a country with resources wanted to do us harm? We're screwed. This sense of and projection of invincibility has never returned. I was taught in school the US is a melting pot of individuals. We're all different individuals. But you come to America, assimilate, and melt into the big happy family called America. Middle Easterns who immigrated to America were perceived as rejections of their country's cultures and ideologies in favor of becoming more westernized. That mindset of welcoming and acceptance of foreigners flipped immediately. The hijackers, who were foreigners, lived amongst us for months and years. Immediately, there was a huge distrust of Middle Easterners. This has not changed for a lot of Americans and has given a rise to this plague of nationalism you see now. Also, the heightened airport security and the US government's surveillance of its citizens in the name of national security flies in the face of this notion America is the freest country on earth. Additionally, there was this huge amount of propaganda that said, as a patriotic American, if you see something suspicious, say something to authorities. This sense of true freedom has never returned, and we're all on the outlook to report something suspicious. I believe this has morphed into Karens reporting suspicious people, aka minorities, in their neighborhoods. There's probably more. These are the biggest changes I've seen from 9/11, and there's no denying that there was a ripple effect after. Celebrating my 17th birthday. This was in Colorado, so the news broke right after I left for school. I got flowers and cards from friends, and we hung out before class started. Then I went to first period. We had a sub and she opened the class with the news. She let us watch it on TV, and by that point, both towers had already been hit. I was kind of just half doing my assignments and checking the TV. I distinctly remember looking up after the first tower collapsed and said, dumbfounded, "Where's the other one?" Every class had the news on, and we obviously didn't do anything else that day. Then I went home and we didn't really know what to do. Nobody felt like celebrating, but my grandparents were there, so I decided to at least open gifts. At the time, shirts with cityscapes were trendy. They were black with the skyline and silver glitter. I pointed out one or two mentions that they could be a cool birthday gift. I opened one box, and staring back at me is one of the shirts I liked. It was the World Trade Center. We all stared in horrified silence, and I just put it down and sat there for a moment. Canadian here. I was just dropping my girlfriend off to class, and I heard about it on the CBC. I got home to see the replay of the second plane hit. I was driving on the South Street by the Dahl residence in Halifax when I heard it. I will never forget that day or that moment. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a joke too. I was in the 4th grade at the time. As I remember it, it was just a normal day. Nothing odd going on at school in the morning. A classmate, her mother babysat me from time to time, went home for lunch. When she came back to school, she said something about how planes had hit a tower in the US. I don't remember anything out of the ordinary that afternoon at school, but all I could think about is how outrageous of a story that was. I didn't like her much. She lied all the time too. I remember after my dad came in to pick me up to take me home, I put it on TV. getting ready to watch The Simpsons and wait for dinner. But The Simpsons weren't on. All it was on almost every channel was the news about what had happened. And at that moment I was like, oh my god, she wasn't lying. Was still mad The Simpsons weren't on, but I ended up not sleeping that night. I was asleep at my parents' house. My mom came in and woke me up. She was upset. She wouldn't tell me what it was at first. She made me get up and see it on TV. I still had to go to work that day at Walmart, but there wasn't anybody shopping. I was 18, fresh out of high school. I remember thinking, among other things, that we were about to go to war, and I would probably get drafted. So I figured why not end this video with my own personal story where I was during 9/11. I was in the 8th grade, and I had just gotten to my dyslexia class. This class only had like 6 students in it, and we were pretty cool with the teacher. Well, we thought it was going to be a normal goof around day when one of my classmates, a big guy, we will call him Jimmy, comes walking into the class and says, "Did you guys see? A plane crashed into a building." We all responded like, "What are you talking about, Jimmy?" He then said, "Yeah, look, turn on the TV, it's on the news." So my teacher lets us turn on the TV we had in the classroom, and we just sat there and watched the news coverage of the planes crashing into the towers. Now, I won't sit here and say I understood the gravity of the situation at the time. I was in middle school. All I cared about was video games, girls, and TV. I finished the rest of the day, but so many kids were taken out of class by their families. I remember going home and every channel just covering the attacks. I think only kids channels like Nickelodeon continued playing their regular programming. I was really into MTV at the time, and even they were covering the attacks. I might be mistaken. I remember trying to change the channel and my brother getting super pissed at me the next morning, said I was being disrespectful or something along those lines. I remember my mom getting after him and saying something like, "Don't get mad at him, just let him be a kid." Kind of her way of shielding me from the madness of what was going on. After that, I just remember the world felt different. America was no longer this place that felt safe or awesome. This might have been the first time I noticed hate in the world, because as many know, people from the Middle East during this time got treated differently. It was horrible. But on the other side of the coin, it was also the one time that America felt united. Everyone was on board with getting justice for what happened. Kinda surreal when you compare 9/11 to how Americans treat each other today. 9/11 changed how America saw the world, in my opinion. I also think it reminded a lot of people that life is fragile, and you should appreciate every moment you got, because you never know when it's gonna be your last. That's it for this video. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. It's linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.